For 4 years, he had been repairing the roofs of Korea's dying villages. Then he woke up in a strange world beneath two suns, with a bone spear lodged in his ribs. 3 women beasts wanted him dead. But he didn't look at their spears. He looked at the coughing children by the smoky fire and thought of only one thing. These people have a leaky roof. The cold overtakes him first. Not winter's cold. The cold of wet earth that presses against his face and creeps into his nostrils. Kang Doyoon opens his eyes wide and buries his face into the moss. Green, wet, so close he can see every single strand. He inhales and chokes on the mud. His body won't obey him. His hands are shaking. His head is buzzing like after a blow. He rolls onto his back and stares up at the sky. The sky is alien. Too low, too red. 2 suns hang above the horizon, one above the other, both glowing copper. He blinks. The suns don't disappear. And then something sharp pierces his ribs. He glances down. A bone tip, roughly shaped, tied to the shaft with sinew. Bare feet stick out, narrow, dirty, with black claws instead of nails. He crawls his gaze higher. Leather bindings, skinny thighs, a leather belt cinching his stomach, and a face, almost human. Gray-white hair falls to his shoulders, and from it stick out 2 sharp wolf ears pressed against his skull. Yellow eyes with vertical pupils stare at him the way one stares at a snake found in a sleeping bag. Not killed yet, but already decided. Behind the she-wolf stand 2 more. One is shorter and red-haired. Her foxtail twitches when Doyoon moves. The third is enormous, 2 meters tall, orange stripes on her skin, tiger ears. She holds a spear in one hand and has already decided which shoulder to stab first. Doyoon stops breathing. Not on purpose. His body decides on its own that breathing is dangerous. 3 pairs of eyes, 3 spears, 3 predators. And he's lying in the wet moss in a torn jacket with the Seoul Agricultural Center logo on the pocket. Unarmed, confused, with no chance to jump up and run. He raises his hands, palms up, an ancient gesture. Don't kill me. I have nothing. The she-wolf tilts her head. The spear doesn't lower, but she doesn't move any closer either. Doyoon swallows and speaks softly, in Korean, the only language he knows. He says his name. He says he doesn't know where he is, that he means no harm. The she-wolf doesn't understand a word, but she picks up on the tone. That's how you speak to a wounded beast, softly and evenly so it won't flinch. The spear lowers by a single finger's width, just one, but that's enough for a new breath. The she-wolf growls at the other 2. The tigress snorts and steps back. The she-fox hides her spear behind her back. Doyoon gets 5 seconds of life, then another 5. He sits down, slowly. Every movement as if through water. Hands in plain sight, eyes down. Don't look straight ahead. Don't grin. He knows these rules, not from books, from experience. 4 years in the mountain villages of Korea taught him one thing. When they don't want to see you, you first become small, then useful, then one of them. He looks around. A clearing. A dark, dense forest all around. Huts stick out in the clearing, if you can call them that. Crooked sticks stuck in the ground and covered with pieces of hide. Half the hides are full of holes. A bonfire burns between the huts, right on the ground. Smoke billows in all directions and stings everyone's eyes. And nearby are the children. Doyoon sees them and something clicks inside him like a switch. The children sit by the fire and cough, skinny, dirty, with sunken cheeks. A girl with rabbit ears has tears streaming down her face so much she can't open her eyes. Nearby, an old female rabbit with drooping gray ears sifts through a pile of roots. Half of them are rotten. She picks the ones that are rotting the least. Doyoon watches this, and something heavy slowly turns in his head. He's seen this before. Not here, in another life. Daegu, the village of Cheonsan. 12 old people in crumbling houses with no heat. He'd arrived there as a 22-year-old intern, and the first thing he did was fix Grandma Park's roof. Not part of the plan. It was just raining and water was dripping onto her bed. It's dripping here, too, on everyone and everything. Only there's no grant, and no ministry, and no phone in his pocket. He checks. His pockets are empty. Jacket, jeans, sneakers, that's it. No wallet, no ID, not even a pen. He's nobody. A naked man in a foreign land among beast-like women with spears. And then he notices need. He doesn't immediately understand what it is. A short line flashes above the old hare's head, as if someone had written it in the air with pale letters. He squints. The line reads, "My joints ache in the morning. I can't straighten my fingers until noon." He blinks. The line doesn't fade. He turns his head toward the girl with rabbit ears. A line hangs above her, too. His eyes hurt from the smoke. He's afraid of going blind like his aunt. He looks at the she-wolf. There's nothing above her. Or maybe he just can't read it yet. A high-pitched, unpleasant ringing echoes in his head. He rubs his temples. And along with the ringing comes something else. Not a voice, not text. A sensation, as if someone had placed a heavy book inside his skull and told him to figure it out. Glory to the tribe. These two words appear clearly before his eyes, and next to them, a number. 0. He doesn't know what it means, but he knows it's important. Just as he knows that if he doesn't fix these people's roof by nightfall, the girl with the sick eyes won't last another week in the smoke. He stands up. The she-wolf tenses. He points his hands at the campfire, then at the hut, then at the sky from which it's already drizzling. The she-wolf doesn't understand. He walks over to the nearest hut. No one stops him. He peeks inside. It's wet inside. A dirt floor with no bedding. Smoke drifts in through the holes. No ventilation, no heat. This isn't a home. It's a pit with a roof of sticks. He straightens up and looks around. Trees, clay underfoot, rocks by the stream. He walks toward the stream, scoops up some water, sniffs it. Clean. Looks at the bank. Clay. Rich. Gray. Good. He picks up a lump, kneads it between his fingers. Dense. Not much sand. You could mold things out of this. He looks around. The tigress is still staring him down. The vixen sits crouched, watching with obvious curiosity. The she-wolf stands 3 paces away, a spear in her hand. She doesn't threaten, but she doesn't put it away either. Doyoon speaks again, in Korean. They don't understand him, but he can't stay silent. Silence is a threat. A voice is contact. He asks for embers from the fire, a handful, and a piece of birch bark, and any bowl, even a broken one. He pokes his finger at the fire, cups his hands, points at a tree and makes a motion as if peeling the bark. The she-wolf watches. The she-fox watches. The tigress snorts and turns away. But the old hare understands. She gets up. She wanders over to the pile of things by the far hut. She returns with a clay bowl. The bowl is cracked. The crack runs across the entire bottom. You can't hold water in a bowl like that. Doyoon takes the bowl and nods. He approaches the fire. He scoops out a few embers with a stick. He walks to the birch tree at the edge of the clearing. He peels off a piece of birch bark. He returns. He crouches down by the fire. Everyone watches. Even the children stop coughing and watch. He gathers clay from the shore. He mixes it with gold. He drips fat from a scrap of hide lying by the fire. He stirs it. A thick gray mass forms. He fills the crack with it, on both sides. Smooths it out with his fingers. Places the bowl on the coals. Pours water from the stream. And waits. The she-wolf comes closer. Looks at the bowl. Everyone looks at the bowl. In the steppe, they boil water differently. They hollow out a gourd, pour water into it, heat stones in the fire, They throw the hot stones into the pumpkin one by one until the water bubbles. Half an hour of fuss, half the heat wasted, and every third pumpkin bursts. But Doyoon places the clay bowl right on the fire. The bowl doesn't crack. The paste holds. In 3 minutes, the water bubbles. In 4, it boils. The she-wolf doesn't move. She looks at the boiling water as if it were a miracle. Not magic, not a spell, a miracle of a different kind. Simple and impossible at the same time. Doyoon removes the bowl from the coals. He wraps his hand in birch bark so as not to burn himself. He tears a strip from the hem of his shirt. He strains the boiling water through the cloth into another vessel. Yu has hot, clean water. He approaches the little girl with the sore eyes. He dips a clean cloth into the cooling, boiling water. He presses it against her face, gently. The girl flinches from the heat, but doesn't run away. He washes her eyes. Twice. The girl opens her eyes wide. For the first time in a long time, she looks at him, and a line renews itself in his mind above her. Her eyes hurt less. She wants this man to stay. Doyoon feels something shifting, not in his body, deeper. Glory to the tribe. 1 point, 1 point. For the boiling water and the washed eyes. So little it makes him want to laugh. But he doesn't laugh. He already understands. Every point isn't a reward. Every point is a responsibility. The tigress silently crouches down beside him. She isn't looking at the bowl. She's looking at his hands, at how they move, precisely and gently, without fear, without trembling. The hands of a man who knows what he's doing. A line flashes above her. She wishes her sister could do that too. He remembers. He always remembers. That is the essence of his work, not to build for people, to build for a specific person, for her, for this girl, for this old woman, for this tigress who has a sister and pain in her eyes when she thinks of her. The day fades. 2 copper suns disappear behind the trees. Doyoon sits by the fire among those who wanted to kill him that morning. No one speaks, but the spears are put away. It is the first evening. He does not yet know the name of this place. He does not know that the she-wolf's name is So-rin. He does not know that in 3 days he will build his first roof with his bare hands. He does not know that in a month, refugees with scorched faces will come to the clearing. He doesn't know that in a year he'll stand on the wall of a wooden fortress and watch an army in shining armor march toward him. But one thing he knows for sure. These people have a leaky roof, and he knows how to fix it. It was the worst night of his life. Doyoon lay on the bare ground under a hide that smelled as if someone had died in it and then been buried there. The cold came from below. The earth drew the warmth from his body greedily and steadily. He didn't sleep. Not because he was afraid, although he was afraid too. He didn't sleep because he was thinking. 42 souls, 11 children, crooked huts with no floors and no walls, a campfire on the bare ground. Food was roots and whatever they managed to catch, water from the stream, unboiled. He lay there and counted. That's what he always did when he arrived in a new village. First you count, then you plan, then you act. In the morning, he got up earlier than anyone else. His body ached, every muscle, every joint. He was a city man, and the night on the ground reminded him of that with mocking precision. He washed up by the stream and looked around. In the morning light, the encampment looked even worse than it had in the evening. The huts stood haphazardly. No lines, no order. Waste lay scattered right between the dwellings. The stream flowed 10 paces from where someone had relieved themselves. Doyoon closed his eyes and exhaled. Then he opened them and got to work. The first thing he did was find a stick, long and straight. He walked over to a patch of open ground by the fire and began to draw. A sketch, a simple rectangle, 2 by 3 meters, walls, a roof, a chimney. He drew and muttered in Korean, explaining it to himself. Dimensions, angles, the height of the walls. The she-wolf So-rin appeared from behind the shelter. She stood and watched. Doyoon didn't turn around. He drew. When he finished the sketch, he straightened up and poked at the drawing with a stick. Then he poked at the nearest shelter, then back at the drawing. The difference was clear even without words. A shelter is sticks and holes. A blueprint is a house, with corners, with a roof that doesn't leak, with a smoke hole at the top. So Rin came closer. She crouched down. She looked at the lines in the ground, and Doyoon saw her eyes widen slightly. The blueprint in the dust. His ability had worked. So Rin looked at the drawing and memorized every line, not as a picture, but as instructions, as if her hands already knew what to do. She looked up at him, yellow eyes, attentive. Something in them had changed. Not trust, not yet, but curiosity, sharp and hungry. Doyoon pointed at the forest, then at the sketch. Then he made a chopping motion with his hands. So Rin stood up. She gave a short whistle. 4 more she-wolves emerged from the huts, young, alert, with stone axes at their belts. So Rin growled at them briefly, pointed at the forest. The she-wolves exchanged glances, then looked at Doyoon, then at So Rin. So Rin growled again, louder. The she-wolves went into the forest. An hour later, they returned with logs, crooked ones, of varying thicknesses, but they were logs. Doyoon stood in front of the pile of wood and began sorting. The thick ones here, the thin ones here, the crooked ones into a third pile. He didn't have enough tools. They had stone axes and bone knives, no saws, no decent rope, not a single nail. He stood there looking at that pile, and for a second it hit him. Panic, quiet and icy. He wasn't in Korea, not in Laos. He was God knows where, with stone axes and wolves and 2 suns in the sky, and he had to build a house out of nothing. The panic lasted 3 seconds. Then he remembered the village of Cheonsan, the first day, 12 old men, a collapsed roof, and Foreman Park, who looked at him and said, "Kid, we don't have your fancy gadgets here. We have hands. We have wood. There's me, an old fool. What are we going to do?" And Doyoon replied, "We'll build." He exhaled. He looked at So Rin. He lifted a thick log by one end. She understood. She lifted it from the other end. They carried it to the spot where he had marked out the foundation. The first log was laid on the ground. Doyoon gestured with his hands to indicate where to place the next one. The she-wolves worked quickly. They were 3 times stronger than him. A log that he could barely lift, a young she-wolf would hoist onto her shoulder and carry at a run. But they didn't know where to place them. They didn't understand what a right angle was, what a level was, what a mortise was. Doyoon showed them, time and again, patiently. He took a stick and drew on ground. Here's a log, here's a groove. This is how one fits into the other. The drawing in the dust worked every time. The she-wolf looked at the drawing. Her eyes glazed over for half a second, and then her hands began to do it right. By noon, the walls were waist-high, 4 rows of logs, crooked, with gaps, but standing. Doyoon sat on the ground, breathing heavily. So Rin stood over him and looked at the walls, then at him, then back at the walls. She said something in her own language. Doyoon didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. It was a question. She was asking why. He stood up. He walked over to the little girl with the sickly eyes. He took her by the hand and led her to the construction site. He pointed at the walls. Then he pointed at the sky. Then he covered his head with his hands. "A roof for you." The girl looked at the walls, then at him. Then she sneezed. With Rin beside her, she made a sound that might have been laughter, or it might not have been. By evening on the second day, the walls stood chest high. Doyoon filled the cracks between the logs with a mixture of clay and moss. It was rough and ugly, but it was airtight. He showed the 3 young she-wolves how to mix the clay with water, how to add moss, how to press the mixture into the cracks with their fingers. They did it silently and intently. A thought crossed one of their minds. "I like working with my hands. I was never allowed to." Doyoon remembered her face. The tigress Nambi sat off to the side all day, watching. Her left arm hung in a sling, an old injury. She couldn't help, but she watched. And by evening, she approached Doyoon and said a single word. He didn't understand it, But from the way she said it, he knew it was approval. Brief and reluctant, but approval. On the third day, it rained, cold and heavy. Construction stopped. Everyone huddled in their huts. The children coughed. The old hare trembled. The fire hissed and spat the raindrops. Doyoon sat in the unfinished house. The walls came up to his chest. There was no roof yet. The rain poured down on his head. He was freezing. He was shivering. He was wet and hungry and alone, and a single thought swirled in his head. Mom had said, "Don't sit by the wing." And then Sorin came, silently. She sat down next to him, soaked to the bone. The gray-white fur on her ears was plastered to her head. She didn't say a word. She just sat down. She took a piece of smoked meat from her bosom and placed it next to him. Then she turned away and stared at the rain. Doyoon took the meat, tough, stringy, over-salted, the most delicious food of his life. He ate and watched the rain with her. Two wet creatures in an unfinished house. Linguistic resonance. He remembered that name. 3 weeks of working together, and he would begin to understand her. But 3 weeks is a long time. He needed to act quickly. On the fourth day, the rain stopped. Doyoon emerged from his shelter at dawn. The ground had softened. His feet sank up to his ankles. But he had a plan in his head. The roof. Today, at any cost. He drew a new sketch. Rafters. 2 long poles from wall to wall. Crossbeams. A layer of birch bark on top. A layer of turf on top. Heavy. Rough. But it wouldn't leak. Sorin looked at the sketch. Her eyes glazed over again for half a second. Then she nodded. She nodded at him for the first time. She didn't growl. She didn't point her spear at him. She nodded, as an equal. Doyoon felt the tribe's glory tremble. 2 points. 1 point for the she-wolf acknowledging his right to draw for the first time. The she-wolves chopped. Doyoon marked out the layout. By noon, the rafters were laid against the walls. By evening, the crossbeams were tied down with vines. Doyoon climbed up. He was swaying. The height was 3 meters, a trifle for a she-wolf. For a city Korean weighing 70 kilograms, it was a trial. He laid out the birch bark, layer by layer, overlapping. Then he placed pieces of turf on top, heavy and wet. His hands trembled. His back burned. Once he almost fell. Someone's hand grabbed his ankle. Nambi, with one hand, her good one. She held him like a kitten, effortlessly. She simply didn't let him fall. Doyoon looked down at her from above. She looked up at him from below. Her face was expressionless. But she didn't let go of his leg until he finished the row. By the time the sun had set behind the trees, the roof was ready. Rough, bumpy, crooked, but solid. Doyoon climbed inside, walls up to his chest, a roof over his head, dirt floor, damp, dark, and not a single drop of rain. He sat down on the floor and laughed, quietly, wearily, almost soundlessly. It was the ugliest house he had ever built, and the most important. Sorin peeked inside. Then she stepped in, stood up to her full height. Her head almost touched the roof. She raised her hand and ran her palm over the bark. Dry, not a drop. She turned to Doyoon. Something flashed in her yellow eyes, quick and strange. Then she went out. A minute later, she returned with the little rabbit girl in her arms. She set her down inside. The girl looked around. She touched the wall. She touched the roof. Above her, the line changed. "It doesn't drip here." Doyoon read it and turned away so no one would see his face. Glory to the tribe. 5. 3 points for the house, for the first roof in this camp that didn't leak. Night was falling over the camp. Doyoon's 5th night in this world. Inside the house, the old hare and 4 children were sleeping. On the 6th day, he built a stove. Not right away. First, he sat by the stream for 3 hours, molding small bricks out of clay. He dried them in the sun. He checked to see if they cracked. The first batch cracked, the second one too. For the third, he added finely chopped grass and sand from the riverbank to the clay. These held up. Then Yoon remembered Professor Cho's lecture from his junior year. Reinforcement with natural fibers. Back then, it had seemed like boring theory. Now, whether the children would cough through another winter depended on that theory. He built the stove inside the first house, a simple one, a combustion chamber made of bricks, a flat stone for cooking on top, and most importantly, the chimney, a pipe made of the same bricks coated with clay. It ran from the stove upward through a hole in the roof. A simple idea. The fire burns inside, the smoke goes up, the heat stays in the house. For Doyoon, it was a basic design from a first-year textbook. For the camp, it was a miracle. When he lit the first fire in the stove, the whole camp came to watch. 42 pairs of eyes, including the tigress Nam B, who squeezed sideways through the doorway because of her size. The fire blazed up, the smoke rose, up the chimney, through the roof, out into the street. The house was warm and clean. No smoke, no stinging in the eyes. The old hare sat by the stove, holding her palms over the warm stone. Her fingers, which she hadn't been able to straighten until noon, slowly straightened in the warmth. She looked at Doyoon and said something. He didn't understand the words, but he understood that she was crying, quietly, soundlessly, just wet trails down her wrinkled cheeks. Above her, the line changed. For the first time in 2 years, it didn't hurt. Glory to the tribe. 8. 3 points for the stove. Doyoon went outside. Sorin was standing at the entrance. She was watching the smoke rising from the chimney, white and steady, rising into the sky in a column. She turned to him and said a long sentence in her language. Doyoon didn't understand a word, but he understood the main point. She wasn't asking why anymore. She was asking, what next? The next 4 days were the hardest. Doyoon built a second dugout. He built this one differently. He dug a pit 1/2 meter deep. He placed log walls at the bottom of the pit. The result was a semi-underground dwelling, warmer, more stable. The wind didn't blow through. For this dugout, he needed helping hands, and that's when the problems began. The young she-wolves from Sorin's combat wing didn't understand why they were hauling logs. They were warriors. Their business was hunting and fighting, and this stranger was making them dig holes and mix clay. One of them, a sturdy gray she-wolf with a torn ear like Sorin's, approached him on the 7th day and poked him in the chest with her finger. Then she said something short and sharp. Doyoon didn't understand the words, but he understood she was refusing. She considered it beneath her. He looked at her. A line hung over her. She wants to be useful, but doesn't know how else except with a spear. Doyoon thought for 3 seconds. Then he picked up a stick and drew a spear on the ground. Next to it, he drew a log. Then he drew a she-wolf carrying the log on her shoulder like a spear. The drawing was crude, but the she-wolf looked at it and snorted. Not maliciously, mockingly. Then she turned to the pile of logs, hoisted 2 onto her shoulders, and carried them to the construction site. Doyoon didn't smile, but inside, something gave way. On the 10th day, 2 houses stood with stoves and chimneys. The camp's population had been redistributed. The first house was home to the children and the old hare. The second housed the sick and wounded. The rest still slept in the huts. But the order had been established. Doyoon drew a plan of the entire camp. 6 houses, a cellar, a fire pit in the center, drainage ditches along the perimeter, an outhouse far from the stream. He drew, and they came to watch him. Every time, the she-wolves, the tigress, the children, they stood and looked at the lines in the ground, and the drawing in the dust did its work. They memorized, they learned, not because he forced them to, because knowledge entered them through their eyes and settled in their hands. On the 12th day, Nam B came. She approached him in the morning, silently. She stood there. Then she held out her healthy right hand to him. In her hand was a knife, not a bone knife, an iron one, rough, dark, with nicks, but iron. Doyoon took the knife. It was heavy. He looked at Nam B. She said one word, then another. Then she made a motion with her hands as if striking with a hammer. She was a blacksmith. She had forged it, with one hand, with a bad shoulder. Doyoon turned the knife in his hands. The blade was crooked. The edge was uneven, but it was iron. The first iron in his hands in this world. He could work with this. He looked at Nam-bi and said thank you in Korean. She didn't understand the word, but she understood. She nodded and left. Above her, the line updated. She wants to show where the ore vein lies. Doyoon felt his heart beat faster. An ore vein, iron, not just one knife, but dozens, tools, axes, shovels, nails. With iron, he could build 10 times faster. He ran after Nam-bi. He ran for the first time. He caught up. He pointed at the knife, then at the ground, then at her. Where? She looked at him for a long time, then she turned and walked toward the rocky hill at the edge of the forest. He followed her. They walked for half an hour, in silence. Nam-bi walked with long strides, and Doyoon could barely keep up. She was 6 feet tall. Each of her steps was 1.5 of his. At the foot of the hill, she stopped. She pointed to an outcrop on the slope. Reddish rock, brownish. Doyoon approached. He touched it, chipped off a piece with a stone, rubbed it between his fingers. He wasn't a geologist, but 4 years of work in mountain villages had taught him to distinguish between rock types. It was limonite, brown iron ore. Not the best raw material, but usable. You could smelt iron from it in a simple blast furnace, which he knew how to build. Because in his 3rd year there was an elective on the history of agriculture, and they talked about ancient smelting methods there. Back then he'd taken that elective because the main course was at the same time and had an exam, while the elective didn't. Now, that random decision from 5 years ago was worth more than his entire degree. He turned to Nam-bi, pointed at the ore, then at his hands, then made a smelting gesture. She watched. An expression appeared on her face that he had already seen on So-rin's. Not distrust, but hunger. A hunger for hope. She was a blacksmith without a forge, a master without tools, the last of her clan. And he had just shown her that he knew where to find fuel for her fire. They returned to camp. Doyoon sat down and drew. A blast furnace, a pit, walls of clay bricks, a bellows nozzle, leather bellows, a draft pipe. He drew, and Nam-bi stood over him and watched. The blueprint in dust. Her eyes glazed over. When he finished, she nodded silently and went back to her place. Doyoon watched as she sat down and, for the first time in all the days he had been here, began to do something with her good hand. She kneaded the clay. She shaped bricks. For the kiln. For her kiln. Glory of the tribe wavered. 12. 4 points. Not for the construction. For hope. Doyoon sat by the blueprint and realized that everything was changing. Slowly. Painfully. But changing. He was no longer a stranger they tolerated. He was becoming something else. Not a chief, not yet, but someone they didn't want to lose. On the 13th day, he began digging drainage ditches, shallow ones, ankle deep, all around the camp. The water from the clearing was supposed to flow away from the dwellings toward the stream. Simple land improvement, first-year stuff, a basic thing. But for a camp where mud stood knee-deep between the houses after every rain, it was a revelation. Everyone dug, even the children. A little girl with sore eyes that had almost healed carried clumps of earth in her tiny hands. At first, Yoon wanted to stop her. Then he saw the line. She wants to help. She's afraid that if she doesn't help, they'll chase her away. He didn't stop her. Instead, he gave her a task. A small one, something she could handle. To carry clay for plastering from the stream to the houses. She nodded as seriously as if he had entrusted her with the defense of the fortress and ran to the stream. By evening, the ditches were ready. When it rained the next day, water flowed through the ditches, past the houses, past the campfire, into the stream. It was dry between the houses, relatively speaking. Better than it had been. Much better. Doyoon stood in the rain and watched as the water flowed where he had directed it. And he smiled. Wet, dirty, with scraped hands and pain in every muscle. But he was smiling. Because it worked. Second course, basic land reclamation. It worked here just as it did in Korea. Physics is the same in all worlds. On the 14th day, what he had been waiting for and fearing happened. So-rin came to him in the evening. She sat down next to him by the fire. She was silent for a long time. Then she spoke, slowly, choosing her words. He understood almost nothing, but two words stuck with him. One sounded like others. The second sounded like they're coming. Others are coming. So-rin pointed south. Then she held up 3 fingers. Then she made a gesture that unmistakably meant weapons. 3 people with weapons are coming from the south. Doyoon felt a chill. 2 weeks had passed. He had built 2 houses. He had set up drainage. He had begun building a furnace for smelting iron. The children had stopped coughing. For the first time in 2 years, the old hare was able to straighten her fingers in the morning. All of this was fragile, like that first bowl. One crack and everything would fall apart. Rin looked at him. She waited. He didn't know what she was waiting for, an order or a decision, or at least a reaction. He closed his eyes, thought, opened them, pointed at the construction site, at the houses, at the people, then at himself. Then he indicated what he would build, not run away, build. So Rin looked at him for 5 seconds. Then she stood up, raised her spear, whistled into the darkness. 4 shadows emerged from the huts, she-wolves, warriors, with spears and stone axes. So Rin said something brief to them. They vanished into the night forest, soundlessly, like smoke. So Rin turned to Doyoon, nodded, and followed them. He remained alone by the fire. Nam-bi stepped out of the darkness, sat down silently beside him. In her hand she held her iron knife. She didn't say a word, but her presence said everything that needed to be said. She stayed, to watch over him. Doyoon didn't sleep all night. In the morning, So-rin returned. There was blood on her hands, not hers. She placed 3 leather pouches in front of him. Inside the pouches were ropes, iron shackles, a branding iron for livestock, slave traders. So-rin pointed south. By the 3rd week, his speech began to return. Not entirely, in fragments. Doyoon hauled logs alongside So-rin and suddenly realized that the word she repeated every time a log fell unevenly meant crooked. Crooked. 1 word. Then a second. Water. He heard it when they were drawing water from the stream together. So-rin said it, and he simply understood, effortlessly, as if the word had always been in his head, just waiting. Linguistic resonance. It works through shared labor. They dug, kneaded, carried, and built side by side, and language seeped through it like water through cloth. By the end of the 3rd week, he knew about 40 words in the wolf dialect. Crooked, water, fire, tree, stone, child, hurt, eat, sleep, build, grab, pull, stop, go, no, yes, good, bad, dangerous, not much. He couldn't form sentences, but he could communicate, with short, abrupt commands, like a foreman on a construction site, and that was enough. On the 22nd day, an event occurred that changed everything. Doyoon stood by the nearly finished smokehouse oven and explained to Nam-bi, using gestures and his 40 words, how the draft should work. Nam-bi listened, silently, with that expression she had when she was thinking, focused and heavy. And then a girl came out of the forest, a little girl, about 10 years old, dirty, so thin that her ribs showed through her skin, red ears, a fox's tail, just one. The girl walked and fell, got up and walked, fell and got up. Behind her, a woman emerged from the forest, also red-haired, also a fox, an adult, with 3 tails. She was carrying another child on her back, motionless, then another, and another. They came out of the forest one by one and in pairs, dirty, exhausted. Some were wounded, burns, cuts. Their eyes were empty and dead, like those of people who have seen things that make the eyes die. There were 23 of them, women and children, not a single man. The first fox, the one carrying a child on her back, she reached the center of the clearing and fell to her knees. The child slid off her back onto the ground, didn't move. Doyoon rushed to her. He turned the child over. A boy, about 4 years old. Fox ears, hot, burning all over. A line appeared above him. The heat has been going on for 3 days. He wants to drink. He wants the fire to stop. Doyoon raised his head. He looked at the mother. A line appeared above her. The village is burned. Everyone is dead. She has been carrying her son for 3 days without stopping. The fox looked at him, and he could see she didn't understand where she had ended up. She had been heading north. She walked as long as her legs would carry her, and she ended up here, with the wolves, to her historic enemies, because there was nowhere else to go. So Rin was already standing nearby, with a spear. She was looking at the foxes. Her ears were pinned back. It wasn't fear, it was tension. Wolves and foxes didn't get along. They never had. Foxes are cunning and untrustworthy. Wolves are straightforward and harsh. It was an old feud, older than any of those now living. So Rin turned to Doyoon. There was a question in her eyes. She was waiting. Everyone was waiting. The she-wolves stood in a semicircle. The foxes lay on the ground. The children were crying. And everyone was looking at him. At the human. At the stranger. At the one who builds houses and boils water. He had to decide. For the first time, he had to decide not what to build, but whom to let in. Doyoon looked at the sick boy, at his mother, at 23 pairs of eyes. Then he turned to So Rin. He said one word. The first word he had ever used in her language, fully confident that she would understand. Yes. So Rin clenched her jaw. He saw the muscles in her cheekbones tense, but she nodded. She turned to the she-wolves. She growled a short command. The she-wolves lowered their spears. They didn't put them away, lowered them. It was consent, not joy. Doyoon fell to his knees beside the boy. He needed clean water, a fever reducer, antibiotics. He had none of these. He had boiled water, a clean cloth, and knowledge of field medicine from his work in remote villages. He boiled the water, cooled it to a tolerable temperature, wiped the boy down with a wet cloth, brought down the fever, gave him small sips to drink, rubbed his chest with fat mixed with crushed pine needles. Not medicine, but better than nothing. The boy was breathing heavily, but he was breathing. By morning, the fever began to subside. Doyoon sat over him all night. His mother sat nearby. She didn't leave. She didn't eat. She didn't drink. She just looked at her son and at Doyoon's hands. Toward morning, when the boy finally fell asleep peacefully without delirium, the mother raised her eyes. She looked at Doyoon and said something in the fox dialect. He didn't understand, but he saw the line above her. She wants to stay here. Nowhere else to go. Glory to the tribe. 22, 6 points. For the decision to accept. For the night spent at the sick boy's bedside. For the fact that the boy is breathing. The next morning, Doyoon faced a real conflict within the camp for the first time. There wasn't enough food. 42 mouths to feed before. Now 65. The supplies of smoked meat that the she-wolves had hunted weren't meant for this. A young she-wolf. That very one, strong, with a torn ear. She approached So Rin in front of everyone and spoke, loudly, sharply. Doyoon already enough to grasp the gist. She was saying that the foxes were none of their business, that the food was theirs, that the foxes had always stolen from the wolves and had now come to steal again. So Rin was silent. She listened, and she wasn't looking at the she-wolf. She was looking at Doyoon. She was waiting for his decision again. Doyoon stood up. He walked over to the map he had drawn on a large, flat rock, a map of the camp and the surrounding area. He poked his finger at the stream, then at the clearing to the north. Then he drew squares with a stick. Fields. He showed that if they cleared the clearing to the north and planted barley there would be enough food for everyone. But that would require hands. Lots of hands. He pointed at the foxes. then at the clearing, then at the squares. The meaning was simple. They weren't mouths, they were hands. More people meant more work, meant more food. The she-wolf with the torn ear snorted. She didn't believe him, but So-rin nodded. Slowly, she understood. And that look again. Not distrust, but a choice. She chose to believe him, over and over again, every day. The next day, Doyoon led the foxes to the northern clearing. He gave them stone hoes. He showed them how to loosen the soil. He drew a sketch. The sketch in the dust worked here, too. The foxes learned quickly, faster than the she-wolves. Their hands were more nimble, slenderer. They dug not with the strength of the she-wolves, but with the precision the she-wolves lacked. By the end of the day, the first plot had been cleared. Small, 10 by 10 meters, but cleared, with furrows, ready for sowing. They lacked seeds. Doyoon knew that trade caravans sometimes passed through the steppe. He had seen tracks on the southern trail, old, but regular. He needed grain, barley, millet, anything that grew quickly and didn't require much water. But to trade, he needed something to exchange. He surveyed the camp. Hides. They had hides, roughly tanned, but hides. He turned to So-rin. With difficulty, 40 words and gestures, but the meaning got through. He needed a caravan. He needed a trade. Hides for grain. So-rin listened. She nodded. She sent 2 she-wolves to the southern trail to wait. They waited 4 days. On the 5th, a caravan arrived. A small one. 3 wagons. A human merchant with 2 guards. The she-wolves stepped out onto the trail. The merchant turned pale. The guards grabbed their swords, but the she-wolves did not attack. They stood there, holding bundles of hides before them, and waited. The merchant was greedy. Greed proved stronger than fear. He drove up, examined the hides, offered a handful of barley. 3 handfuls. A measly 3 handfuls for 10 hides. So-rin growled. Doyoon hadn't seen this. He sat in the camp and built the 4th house. But when the she-wolves returned with a sack of barley, a full sack, he realized the negotiations had gone according to wolf protocol. So-rin tossed the sack at his feet. It contained enough grain for 3 plots. Doyoon picked up the sack, opened it, scooped up a handful of grain. He looked at it. Golden, dry, whole, good grain. He stood in a clearing in a foreign world with a sack of barley in his hands and felt as if he were holding the future. Because that was exactly what it was. Grain is not food. Grain is time. 1 harvest yields grain for 3 sowings. 3 sowings yield grain for 20. In a year, they'll have enough to not depend on hunting. In 2 years, enough to trade. He closed the sack, pressed it to his chest. So-rin stood beside him. She didn't understand why he was hugging the sack of grain, but she saw his face, and whatever she saw there made her ear twitch. One, the left one, torn. Then she turned away and left, and Doyoon carried the sack to the northern clearing. The first sowing, barley in a foreign land, under foreign suns. He knelt down, dug a furrow with his fingers, dropped the grains, covered them. He watered it. The foxes stood nearby and watched. They didn't understand what he was doing. They had never sown seeds. They were hunters and gatherers. Farming was as much a mystery to them as a stove with a chimney. Doyoon showed them. Here is the furrow. Here is the grain. Here is the soil on top. Here is the water. He drew on the ground what would happen in a week, a sprout. In a month, a stalk. In 3 months, an ear of grain. The drawing in the dust worked. The foxes memorized it. Their eyes glazed over for half a second, and then their hands began to move correctly. By evening, 3 plots had been sown. Doyoon stood at the edge of the field and looked at the even furrows. Behind him stood the camp. 4 houses with fireplaces, drainage ditches, a smithy under construction, 65 souls. He had been here 28 days, less than a month. Glory to the tribe, 31. He didn't know exactly what that meant in practical terms, but he noticed. The children got sick less often, wounds healed a little faster. The she-wolves grew tired a little later. Little things, barely noticeable, but he noticed because noticing was his job. The barley sprouted on the 9th day. Thin green needles pierced the black earth in even rows. Doyoon stood at the edge of the field and looked at the sprouts, and his throat tightened. Not from emotion, from relief. He wasn't sure the soil here would accept the grain, that the 2 suns would provide enough light without scorching it, that the soil had the right acidity. He had wondered and hoped, and now the barley had sprouted. The earth had accepted them. Yoon Ara stood beside him. She looked at the sprouts, and her face bore an expression that Doyoon had already learned to read in foxes. Calculation. She was counting. 3 plots, 9 days until sprouting, 3 months until harvest. How much grain is that? How many mouths to feed? How many days without hunger? She turned to him and said in the wolf dialect, "Not enough." Doyoon nodded. Not enough. But this is the first sowing, a trial run. If it rains at the right time, and if the pests don't eat anything, then in 3 months they'll have enough grain for 10 plots, and in 6 months for 100. The math of survival. Yoon Ara nodded. She understood the math, maybe better than he did. By the 5th week, Nambi had finished the forge. Not by herself. Doyoon helped every day. He showed her. He drew. The blueprint worked in the dust, but a blueprint wasn't enough for Nambi. She wanted to understand, not just memorize with her hands, but grasp with her mind. She asked questions, with gestures and the few words they shared. Why was the pipe that tall? Why was the nozzle at that angle? Why coal and not wood? Doyoon answered. Draft, temperature, burning time. She listened, nodded, and did it better than he demonstrated. Because she was a blacksmith, a real one. She knew metal with her hands, knew fire with her eyes, knew the sound of striking red-hot iron as a musician knows a note. She lacked knowledge, theory, the things that filled Doyoon's head, but she had her own skill, innate and hard-won. They carried out the first smelting together. Doyoon loaded the ore into the furnace. Nambi pumped the bellows with one hand, her good one. Her left hand hung in a sling. She pumped the bellows steadily and powerfully, hour after hour. Sweat ran down her striped skin. The orange stripes darkened from the heat. The furnace hummed. Doyoon monitored the temperature by the color of the flame. White, yellow, orange. When the flame turned yellow-white, he knew the temperature was high enough. They waited. 6 hours. Then Doyoon dismantled the front wall of the furnace. Inside, at the bottom, lay a lump. Dark, shapeless, spongy, crude, raw iron, full of slag and impurities, but iron. Nambi picked it up with tongs, placed it on the stone, raised the hammer, and struck. With one hand, her strong hand. The blow was precise and heavy. Sparks flew in all directions. She struck again and again. The slag flew off. The iron flattened. It compacted. With every blow, it became purer. Doyoon stood nearby and watched. He knew the theory. She knew the practice. Together, from a chunk of dirty ore and 6 hours of work, they produced a strip of iron the length of a palm. Nambi lifted the strip. She turned it in the light. She looked at Doyoon. Her face bore an expression he had never seen before. Not approval, not hope, something more. Something that made her immediately turn away and start cleaning up the slag. Above her, the line updated. For the first time in 5 years, she feels like herself. Glory of the tribe. 38. 7 points for the forge. For iron. For the fact that the master is a master again. Doyoon began to understand how glory works. Not for things, not for buildings, for people. When a person stops being what they were forced to be and becomes who they are. When the master is a blacksmith again. When the warrior is a warrior again. When a child is a child again and not a hungry little beast. That is when Slava grows. From the first strip of iron, Nambi forged neither a knife nor an axe. She forged a needle, a thick one, a rough one, a crooked one, but a needle. She brought it to the old hare. The old woman took the needle with trembling fingers that could barely straighten in the mornings. She looked at it. and began to sew. Right there on the spot, she took a piece of hide and began to sew, with even small stitches. She hadn't sewn in 5 years, not since the last bone needle broke. Nambi stood nearby and watched. 2 women who would never have spoken to each other, a tigress from the mountain clan and an old hair woman from the lowland tribe. One gave the game, the other gave it meaning. Glory wavered. 40. Doyoon watched and took notes, not on paper, in his head. Every point, every trigger. He was mapping out the system, what earned points, what didn't. Construction earned them, food earned them, healing earned them. But what earned the most were the moments when someone became who they wanted to be. A blacksmith at the forge, a seamstress with a needle, a child who plays instead of hiding, a warrior who defends instead of attacking. Choice, freedom, dignity. That's what fueled Slava. In the 6th week, he began building a bathhouse. It was an idea that came to him at night and wouldn't let go. Hygiene was a disaster. The beast girls washed in the stream, a cold one, not every day. There was no soap, wounds festered, skin diseases spread from one to another. The children scratched themselves until they bled. Until then, Yoon knew he could make soap. Ash plus fat, lye, basic chemistry. But soap required hot water, lots of hot water. And for hot water, he needed a bathhouse. He drew a sketch, a small building, a stone stove inside, a large cauldron on the stove. No, not a cauldron. They didn't have a cauldron. A clay vessel, a large one, fired. He drew that too. Yoonada looked at the sketch and asked why. Doyoon explained, in broken wolfish, interspersed with gestures. Dirt, disease, hot water, clean, not sickness. Yoonada raised an eyebrow, then the other. Then she said something in Fox that, judging by the intonation, was closest to the words, "You want us to wash in the house?" Doyoon nodded. Yoonada looked at him, then at the sketch, then at him again, and for the first time, she smiled. Not widely, just of her mouth, a fox-like smile, in which there were slightly more teeth than necessary. Building the bathhouse took 10 days. Doyoon and 3 she-wolves laid the stone furnace. Nambi forged iron brackets to secure the walls. The foxes molded a large clay vessel for water. They molded it for 3 days. The first one cracked during firing. The second one held up. When the bathhouse was ready, Doyoon lit a fire in the stove. He heated the water, and he made soap. Ash from the oven, water, boil, strain. You get lye. Lye plus fat. Heat. Stir. Cool. You get soap. Rough, brown, not smelling like roses, but soap. He showed it to Nambi. He explained, wash your hands, wash your body, wash your wounds. Nambi took a bar of soap. She sniffed it. She licked it. Her face contorted. She looked at Doyoon and announced sternly. By then, Doyoon already understood Tigrinya. The dessert is bitter, but we'll eat it. Doyoon shook his head. No, don't eat it. We. Nambi looked at the soap, then at him, then back at the soap. The look on her face was such that Doyoon bit his cheek to keep from laughing. She put the soap down. She didn't finish it. So Rin went into the bath first, not because she wanted to, because she was the leader and couldn't show that she was afraid of this strange place with hot water. She went in. Doyoon waited outside. Through the wall, he could hear water splashing, then silence, a long silence, then a sound, quiet, strange. He didn't realize right away what it was. So Rin was purring. The she-wolf was purring in the hot water. When she came out, she was different. Her wet gray-white fur on her ears glistened. Her skin had turned pink. Her eyes were slightly wider than usual. She looked at Doyoon. She said nothing. She turned and left. But a minute later, 4 she-wolves approached the bathhouse, then 3 more, then the she-foxes, then Nambi, who barely squeezed through the door. By evening, the entire camp had passed through the bathhouse. Doyoon sat outside and listened. The splashing of water, laughter. For the first time, he heard laughter from this camp. Not polite, not nervous, real, feminine, young, lively. Yoon Ara came out last, wet. Her red ponytails stuck out in all directions. She walked over to Doyoon and sat down next to him, silently. Then she said in Wolf, "You're a strange man. You're building a house for water." Doyoon replied, "Water heals." Yoon Ara was silent for a moment. Then she said, "My father said that people are only good as long as they need something. Then they burn it down." Doyoon turned to her. He looked. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the fire. The flames were reflected in her eyes, and behind the flames was a wall, tall, thick, built from the ashes of a burned village. He could have told her that he wasn't like that he wouldn't burn it down, that he was different. But he knew that words were worthless. To a fox who had seen her home burn, words were smoke. So he said nothing. He stood up. He went to the smithy. He took an iron strip from the table. He brought it to Nambi. He asked her to forge a key from it. Nambi asked why. Doyoon said, "For the treasury. Yoon Ara manages the treasury. She needs a key." Nambi looked at him. She nodded. An hour later, the key was ready. Rough, heavy, but a key. Doyoon returned to Yoon Ah. She was still sitting by the fire. He handed her the key. She looked at him, then at the key. "What is this?" "A key." "To what?" "To the treasury. Everything we have, hides, grain, iron. You keep track. You keep it. You decide how much to spend." Yoon Ara didn't move. She stared at the key in his outstretched hand. "If I steal it," Doyoon replied, "then I'm a bad leader. Aren't you a bad fox?" Silence. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the bathhouse, water was still splashing. Yoon Ara took the key, clenched it in her fist, stood up, and left, quickly, without looking back. Doyoon watched her walk past the houses, past the drainage ditches, past the field with green barley sprouts, and into the forest. So-rin appeared beside him, quietly, as always. She pointed to the forest where Yoon Ara had gone. There was a question in her eyes. Doyoon shook his head. "Don't. Let her be." So-rin looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded. Yoon Ara returned at dawn. Her eyes were red. She said nothing. She sat down next to the treasury, a small chest nailed together from planks, in which lay bundles of hides and a small sack of grain for sowing. She hung the key around her neck and began to count. Every hide, every grain. From that morning on, she didn't leave the treasury. She kept records, on birch bark, with a sharp stone, symbols that Yoon didn't understand, but which were more precise than any of his calculations. She counted everything: how much had been eaten, how much was left, how much was needed for a week, for a month, for the winter. And every evening she came to him and reported, briefly, clearly, without emotion. Then she left. But each time, the hand clutching the key around her neck loosened just a little. Glory to the tribe. 47, 7 points. For the bathhouse, for soap, for the key, for the fact that the fox who trusted no one had, for the first time in her life, received trust she hadn't asked for. The 7th week. The camp was changing. Doyoon saw it every day. 4 houses stood in a row. The 5th was being finished. The stoves smoked steadily. The drainage ditches were working. Barley sprouts were green in the field. At Nambi's forge, she hammered morning and evening. The 2nd and 3rd knives, the 1st shovel, the 1st real axe. Every tool changed life. A shovel means you can dig twice as fast. An axe means you can chop 4 times as fast. Every tool is time. And time is life. Toli, a little hair-like herbalist. He noticed her in the 3rd week. She came to the sick every morning, quietly, unnoticed. She brought herbal decoctions she had gathered at dawn. She applied poultices. She changed bandages. She knew herbs better than Doyoon knew agronomy. Every root, every leaf. Which one for fever? Which one for pain? Which one for inflammation? Her knowledge was oral, passed down from mother to daughter. And they worked. But she worked alone, without tools, without a room, without assistance. In the 7th week, Doyoon came to her. She was sitting by her hut, grinding roots in a stone mortar. He sat down beside her. She flinched, her ears flattened. She wasn't used to attention, especially from the chief. He spoke, in wolf, slowly, choosing his words. He said he saw how she worked, that she healed more people than he did, that she needed a home. For her work, for the herbs, for those who were wounded and sick. Tali looked at him. Big gray eyes, long drooping ears. She didn't move. Then she opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She stuttered when she was nervous. The words came with difficulty, but the meaning got through. She said she didn't need a home, that she was managing, that there were others who needed it more. A line hung over her. She was afraid that if she asked for herself, they would take it away from someone else. Doyoon shook his head. He said, "The infirmary isn't for you, it's for them, for the children who are sick, for the warriors who are wounded, for the elderly. You heal. You need a place." Tali fell silent. Then she nodded. Once, a small nod, and she turned away toward her roots, but her ears perked up, just a little. For the first time in all the days he'd seen her, her ears perked up. They began building the infirmary the next day, the 6th house, but different, bigger, with 2 rooms. In one, shelves for herbs and poultices. In the other, beds made of skins on wooden frames, a stove, a chimney, and most importantly, a window. A real window. A wooden frame, the opening covered with a thin tanned hide, semi-transparent, letting in light but not the wind. When Tali saw the light through the window, soft, diffused, falling on the freshly scraped floor, she stood and looked at it for a very long time. Then she quietly dropped to her knees. She ran her hand over the floor and began arranging her jars and pouches of herbs on the shelves, silently, carefully, each in its place. She knew which place was right. She always knew. She just had never been given shelves. Glory to the tribe. 54. 7 points. For the infirmary, for the window, for the shelves, for the fact that, for the first time in her life, the herbalist was working not on the ground but at a table. Doyoon stood in the doorway and watched. Yoon Ara approached from behind. She stood beside him. She said quietly, "You don't build houses. You're building people." Doyoon was silent for a moment. Then he replied, "No, I give people a place so they can build themselves." Yoon Ara looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "My father didn't know how to do that." Then she left, to the treasury, to count. That evening, Doyoon sat alone by the fire. That rarely happened. Usually, So-rin or Nam-bi or Yoon Ara with a report. But today everyone was busy. The bathhouse was open. In the infirmary, Tali was tucking 2 wounded she-wolves in for the night. Food was growing in the field. Metal was cooling in the smithy. He sat alone and counted. Not glory, not resources. Days. 7 weeks. 49 days in this world. He had built 6 houses, ovens, a smithy, a bathhouse, an infirmary, drainage, a field. He took in 23 refugees. He got his first advisor. He received iron, and lost 3 slave traders on the southern border. Somewhere out there, they were already thinking about them. Somewhere out there, they already knew that 3 men had gone into the steppe and not returned. He didn't know who would come next, slave traders, soldiers, knights, but someone would come. It was as inevitable as rain, and when they came, 6 houses and 54 points of glory would not stop them. He needed more people, more walls, more weapons, more time. He had no time. He looked up at the sky. The 2 copper suns had long since set. Stars hung over the camp, alien, unfamiliar, beautiful. Children's laughter rang out from the house, then more. Then the voice of the old hare, quiet, soft. She was telling a story. They built the palisade for 12 days. Before that, Yoon had marked out the perimeter with sticks stuck in the ground, a circle. 120 meters in diameter. Inside was the entire camp. Houses, the smithy, the bathhouse, the infirmary. The field remained outside. It was a vulnerable spot, but the field couldn't be enclosed by a wall. Too big. Doyoon accepted this and moved on. The she-wolves chopped the logs with new iron axes. Nambi had forged 4 axes in a week, rough, heavy, but you could chop with them 3 times faster than with stone ones. The difference was immediately apparent. A tree that used to take an hour to fell now fell in 20 minutes. Doyoon stood and counted. 120 meters of perimeter, logs every 30 centimeters, 400 logs. Each one needed to be cut down, cleaned, sharpened, buried. 400 times the same motion. He couldn't do it alone. He couldn't even do it with 10 she-wolves. He needed everyone. And everyone came. The she-wolves chopped. The she-foxes stripped the branches. Even the children hauled the scraps into a pile for the fire. Nambi forged iron brackets for the gate. Yun-ara counted the logs and kept track of who had cut how many. Not to keep tabs, for fairness, so that no one would work more than the others, so that everyone would be equally tired. Doyoon drew the blueprints, gates, 2 of them, north and south, with bolts, with iron hinges, with a platform on top for a lookout. A simple design, but for a camp that a week ago had been an open clearing, it was a fortress. On the 5th day of construction, So-rin arrived. She sat down next to him by the blueprint and was silent for a long time. Then she spoke, slowly. Doyoon already understood the wolves enough to make out long sentences. She said that in the south there were people in iron, that they had come before, twice. The first time they took 6. The second time they took 9. She said this flatly, without emotion in her voice, but her right hand was gripping the spear shaft so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Doyoon asked, "When?" So-rin pointed to the trees. "The leaves are turning yellow. Soon. They come when the leaves fall, because then the steppe is open and you can see far, and there's nowhere to run." Doyoon looked at the trees. The leaves were still green, but a yellow edge had already appeared on the very top branches. A month, maybe a month and a half. He turned to So-rin. He said, "Tell me about them, everything you know." So-rin talked for 2 hours. Doyoon listened and drew on the ground. Knights, men in iron armor on horses, with long swords and shields. They come in groups of 10 or 20. The Baron sends them. She didn't know the word Baron. She said a big man from the south who lives in a stone house. They come. They kill those who resist. They tie up the rest and take them away. To the south, to stone houses, to work, to die. Doyoon listened and counted. 20 knights in armor, against she-wolves with spears, even with iron tips. The math was bad. Armor withstands a spear's blow. A sword is longer than a spear. A horse is faster than a she-wolf. In an open field, it's a rout. But they won't be in an open field. They'll have a stockade. And something else. Doyoon turned to So-rin. He asked, "Your bows, show me." So-rin looked at him strangely. Then she stood up and brought a bow, short, made from a single piece of wood, a sinew string, arrows with bone tips. Doyoon took the bow. He drew it. Weak, short, shoots about 30 meters. A bone tip won't pierce leather armor, not to mention iron. But the bow is an idea, and an idea can be improved. He sat down and drew it, a composite bow. Not from a single piece of wood, but from 3 layers, wood, horn, tendon. The principle was the same as that of a Mongolian bow, which he had seen in a museum in Seoul during his junior year when he skipped a soil science lecture and went to an exhibition on nomadic cultures. Back then, it had been entertainment. Now, it was a weapon. He drew and explained. So-rin looked at the sketch. The sketch was covered in dust. Her eyes glazed over. She was memorizing it. But then she looked up at him and said, "Horn. Where to get it?" Doyoon paused. Horn. A composite bow needs horn plates. Cow or goat? There were no cows here. Goats. He raised his head. Goats. Mountain goats. The fourth tribe So-Rin had mentioned. The Stone Ridge tribe. They lived in the mountains to the northeast. They had horns. Doyoon looked at So-Rin. He asked, "Goats, far away." So-Rin pointed to the northeast. A 2-day journey. Doyoon nodded. He needed goats. Not for the horns. For everything. For the alliance. For trade. For numbers. More tribes means more people, means more hands, means better odds. But first, the palisade. On the 12th day, the last log was driven into the ground. The palisade was complete. 400 logs dug 1/2 meter into the clay, sharpened at the top, 2.5 meters high. Not a fortress, but a wall. Doyoon left 3 meters of empty space between the wall and the houses, for maneuvering, for storage, so that an arrow shot from behind the wall wouldn't hit the roof. The gate was mounted on iron hinges. The bolt was made from a single log. Nambi had forged iron brackets for it. When the bolt was in place, Doyoon pushed the gate. It didn't budge. He pushed harder. Nothing. Nambi came over. She pushed with one hand. Nothing. She looked at the gate. Then at Doyoon. She nodded, approvingly. Glory to the tribe. 61. 7 points for the wall, for the gate, for the fact that 65 souls slept behind the fence for the first time in their lives. That night, Doyoon stood on the platform above the south gate and looked out onto the steppe. Dark. Quiet. The wind whipped the grass into waves. Somewhere far to the south, a fire was burning. Small, barely visible, a bonfire, or a fire, or a signal, he didn't know. So Rin stood beside him. She was looking at the fire too. She said, "They know we're here." Doyoon nodded. "They know." So Rin was silent for a moment. Then she said, "We used to run." Doyoon turned to her. "And now?" So Rin looked at the palisade, at the houses behind it, at the smoke from the chimneys. "Now there's a place to keep them out." Doyoon nodded. The next morning he called a council, the first council, in the big house, at a long table. So Rin, Nambi, Yoon-Ara, Toli, an old female shaman named Ul-Ma. 5 women, 5 pairs of eyes. Doyoon spoke. Yoon-Ara translated, into wolf, into fox, into tiger. 3 languages at once. She spoke quickly and precisely, and for the first time he saw why a fox has 6 tails. Each tail moved as she switched to another language, as if the tails were dictionaries. He said that people in iron would come from the south, that they had come before and would come again, that a palisade wouldn't stop them if there were many of them, that he needed more people and more weapons and more time. So Rin asked, "How many?" Doyoon answered, "I don't know, but we need allies. The goats from the mountains, the hares from the quiet lowlands, anyone who's willing." Yoon-Ara raised an eyebrow. She said, "Hares don't fight. Goats don't come down from the mountains. The tigresses are dead." She pointed at Nambi, except for one. Nambi didn't move, but her good hand clenched into a fist on the table. Doyoon looked at each of them. Then he said, "Hares don't fight, but hares heal. Rabbits know herbs. Rabbits are fast and quiet. Goats don't come down, but goats know the mountains. Goats know the trails. Goats have horns, for bows. The tigresses are dead, but one is alive, and she is a blacksmith, and she has apprentices." He looked at Nambi. She was looking at him. For the first time ever, he saw in her eyes not approval or hope, but something else, respect, heavy and reluctant. The kind of respect that must be earned, not asked for. Yoon-Ara translated. Everyone was silent. Then Tali spoke, quietly, with a stutter. She said that her aunt lived in the quiet lowlands, that her aunt knew all the trails, that if they sent someone she knew, the hares would listen. So Rin asked, "Who should they send?" Tali fell silent. She lowered her ears. Then she said, "Me." Doyoon looked at her, a small gray-beige female hare who stuttered every third word, who was afraid of loud noises and hid her eyes. She wanted to go alone across the steppe to her tribe to bring them here. Above her, a line. She's afraid. But she's more afraid that if she doesn't go, they won't help. Doyoon nodded. All right, Tali will go to the hares, but not alone. He turned to So-rin, 2 she-wolves, for protection. So-rin nodded. Then Doyoon turned to Nam-bi. He asked, little goats, you know the way to the mountains? Nam-bi nodded. Doyoon said, I need to go myself. Yoon-ara opened her mouth. So-rin opened her mouth. Nam-bi didn't open her mouth, but her ear twitched. All 3 began to speak at once. Yoon-ara said he was needed here. So-rin said he was weak and slow and would die at the first pass. Nam-bi said nothing but stood up from the table, and that was enough. Doyoon raised his hand. Everyone fell silent. He said, the goats don't know me. If I send the she-wolves, they'll be scared. If I send the she-foxes, they won't believe them. I have to come myself, to tell them, explain, draw. The blueprint only works if I draw it. It was true. The blueprint in the dust only worked when drawn by his hands. He had tested it. So-rin tried drawing the same plan at home. The she-wolves watched but didn't memorize it. When he drew it, they memorized it in half a minute. The system worked through him, and that meant he had to go. So-rin gritted her teeth, literally. He heard it grind. Then she said, I'm going with you. Doyoon shook his head. You're needed here, in case they come from the south. So-rin was silent. Then she nodded, slowly, with effort, as if the nod weighed more than anything she had ever lifted. Nam-bi said, I'm going with him. So-rin looked at her. Nam-bi looked at So-rin. Something passed between them, something quick and silent. Not hostility, not jealousy, recognition. So-rin was the leader of the camp. Nam-bi was the only one who could guide him through the mountains. And So-rin knew that in the mountains, Nam-bi would protect him better than she could herself. She nodded. At dawn the next day, the 2 groups left the gate. Tali, with the 2 she-wolves, headed west toward the quiet lowlands. Doyoon and Nam-bi headed northeast toward the mountains. So-rin stood at the gate. She watched them go. Doyoon turned around once. She stood straight and still, a spear in her hand. The wind ruffled her gray-white hair. He raised his hand. She did not raise hers in response, but he could see that she was watching. He turned and walked on. Nam-bi walked ahead, with long strides. He could barely keep up. She was 6 feet tall. Each of her steps was as long as 1.5 of his. Her left arm was in a sling. Her right was free. Behind her back, a spear and a bag of food. She didn't look back, didn't check if he was following. She knew he was, by the sound, by the scent. Tigresses can hear footsteps from 100 meters away. They walked all day. The steppe gave way to the foothills. The mountains began on the 2nd day. Not gradually, abruptly. The steppe ended at a rocky ledge, and the ascent began. Rock, moss, thin, crooked trees clinging to crevices. There was a trail, narrow, barely visible. Nam-bi walked along it without looking. Her feet knew the way. Yu followed her and thought that if he slipped, he'd fall 20 meters, and no matter how hard she tried, the tigress wouldn't be able to catch him with one hand. He didn't slip, but 3 hours into the climb, his legs gave out. They simply stopped moving. His muscles cramped up. He sat down on a rock and couldn't get up. Nam-bi turned around. She looked. She walked over. She crouched down. Silently, she hoisted him onto her strong shoulder, like a sack, and she carried him. Doyoon wanted to protest, but she carried him so easily that to object would have been an insult. 6 feet tall, over 100 kilograms of muscle. His 70 kilograms were to her what a sack of barley was to him. She carried him for an hour. Then she set him down. He stood. His legs worked. His shame worked too. Nam-bi looked at his face and made a sound. Short, low. Doyoon didn't immediately realize it was laughter. The tigress was laughing. For the first time in his presence. At the end of the 2nd day, they saw smoke. Thin, white, coming from a crevice between the rocks. Nam-bi stopped. She raised her hand. Do-young froze. She listened. Then she pointed ahead. They're here. The trail led into a narrow gorge, steep walls on both sides, a stream below. There were markings on the walls, carved into the stone, horns, spirals, circles, tribal marks. Do-young memorized every one. They passed through the gorge and emerged onto a plateau, and Do-young stopped. It was beautiful. A flat clearing at the top of the mountain, rocks all around, a meadow in the center, huts in the meadow, lightweight, made of animal skins stretched over thin poles, white, clean. Mountain goats grazed nearby, real ones, not beast people, but animals, white with curled horns, and among them walked little goats, beast girls, small, white fur, black curled horns, bare feet on the rocks. They moved across the rocks as if the rocks were a smooth floor, effortlessly, fearlessly. Do-young counted 32 people, women and children, not a single man, just like everywhere else. They spotted them. The little goats froze. One whistled, piercingly. And 10 seconds later, 8 little goats with slings stood at the edge of the plateau. Rocks the size of a fist, loaded, ready. Nam-bi raised both hands. She pulled her left hand out of the sling with a wince, raised it, open palms, not enemies. Do-young raised his, 2 pairs of hands, open palms. The goats watched. One of them stepped forward, older than the others, a dark stripe on her forehead, long twisted horns. She said something. Do-young didn't understand. Nam-bi replied in tiger. The goat shook her head. She didn't understand. Nam-bi tried wolf. The little goat shook her head again. Another language. Do-young stood and watched. Linguistic resonance worked through collaboration. They weren't working together, so he doesn't understand, and they don't understand. A dead end. He looked at the ground. There was earth beneath his feet, earth everywhere. He crouched down, picked up a stick, and drew. A house, a simple rectangle, a roof, a chimney, smoke rising, a fire inside, little people nearby, tiny, with horns on their heads. A little goat with a dark stripe approached. She looked at the drawing, then at Do-young, then back at the drawing, a sketch in the dust. He didn't know if it would work. They weren't his tribe. They were strangers. But the system didn't ask about tribe. The system asked about intent. And the intent was pure. The little goat looked at the drawing. Her eyes widened slightly. They glazed over for half a second. She remembered. Do-young saw the moment it happened. He saw how the fingers on the sling relaxed, how she shifted her gaze from the drawing to him, with surprise, not with fear. She said something, one word. Do-young didn't understand, but from the tone it was something between a question and an invitation. Nam-bi lowered her hands. The slings didn't drop, but the stones loosened slightly in their loops. The goat with the dark stripe pointed at the bonfire in the center of the plateau, then at them. An invitation. Do-young nodded. They sat down by the fire. The goats sat around them in a semicircle. The slings were nearby, ready, but not aimed. Do-young began to draw. He drew a camp, houses, a palisade, a field, a smithy, a bathhouse. He drew people inside, she-wolves, foxes, a tigress. He pointed at Nam-bi. She nodded. He drew children. He drew food on the table. He drew smoke from the chimneys. The goats watched, silently, intently. He drew for a long time, over an hour. Every drawing was a story. A house isn't walls. A house is warmth. A stove isn't stones. A stove is children who don't cough. A wall isn't logs. A wall is time. Time to hide those you love. He couldn't speak, but he could draw, and the drawings spoke. When he finished, the goat with the dark stripe sat silently for a long time. Then she stood up. She went to the distant hut. She returned with a girl. Small, about 5 years old. White fur. One horn broken. Thin. The goat placed the girl in front of Doyoon. She pointed at her. Then at the drawing of the camp. Then at Doyoon. The question was clear. It's for her too. Doyoon looked at the girl. A thought hung over her. She wants to eat. She always wants to eat. He nodded. For her too. The goat with the dark stripe looked at him. 10 seconds. 20. Then she turned to her people and spoke, quickly, sharply. The goats listened. Some shook their heads. One stood up and walked away. But most nodded. The little goat turned to Doyoon. She raised her hand, spread her fingers. 5. Then again. 10. Then she pointed at herself. 11. 11 girls would go with him. The rest would stay in the mountains. Not everyone believed her, but 11 was enough. Doyoon bowed his head, low. The little goat blinked. Then she bowed her head too. Nambi stood nearby and said nothing. But as they were leaving and Doyoon looked back at her, he saw that her eyes were shining, not from the wind. The return journey took 3 days. The 11 little goats walked through the mountains as if on level ground. Doyoon stumbled and fell. The little goat with one horn walked beside him. Sometimes she grabbed his hand when he stumbled. Her palm was small and firm and warm. On the descent into the steppe, the goats froze. They looked out at the plain. Many of them had never come down from the mountains. The plain was foreign to them, open, frightening. No cliffs, no walls, nowhere to hide. Doyoon stood beside them and understood. He pointed south, where a palisade stood beyond the horizon, where chimneys smoked, where food grew. There are walls there, for you too. They set off. As they approached the camp, So-Rin met them. She stood at the gate. She looked at the little goats, then at Doyoon, then at the little goats again. Her face was unreadable. Then she stepped aside. The gate opened. The little goats entered, one after another, small, white, with twisted horns. Among the gray she-wolves and red foxes, they looked like snow on ashes. Yunara darted out from behind the treasury. She counted those entering, 11. Then she looked at Doyoon and said, there were 65, plus 11, 76 mouths, minus the supplies. She began counting on the birch bark. Doyoon stopped her. Not mouths, hands. Yunara looked up, then she nodded. And 2 days later, Tali returned. The hares came with her, not 11, 34, women, children, old people, a whole tribe. The quiet lowlands had sent everyone who could walk, because Tali had told them about the infirmary, about the house with the window, about the shelves for herbs, about hot water and clean bandages. And they believed. Not Doyoon. 2 months were spent on construction. Doyoon slept no more than 5 hours a day. The rest of the time he worked. He drew, he taught, he calculated, he built. 10 new houses in 6 weeks. For the hares, he built dugouts. Low, warm, with wide entrances. Hares love space near the floor and don't like high ceilings. For the goats, he built differently. Yunara suggested the idea, and he took it up. Platforms, wooden decks on posts, 3 meters high, with ladders. The goats slept up top, under the open sky, under a canopy to shelter from the rain. But high up, like in the mountains. The first little goat to climb onto the platform sat down. She tucked her legs in. She looked down at the camp and began to play a bone flute. The melody was delicate and strange. Doyoon heard it from below, and something inside him stirred. Not glory. Deeper. The goat's name was Han Sol, 22 years old, white fur, black twisted horns, bare feet on the stones. She played the flute every evening, and every evening the camp fell silent and listened. She-wolves, foxes, hares, a tigress, everyone. The music had no language, and so everyone understood. Glory of the tribe. 83. 5 points for the music, For the fact that, for the first time in this place, someone had done something not for survival, but for beauty. Doyoon committed this to memory. Beauty, too, feeds glory, not just bread. The barley had sprouted, green stalks up to the knees. In a month, ears of grain. In 2, the harvest. But a month is a long time when you have 110 mouths to feed. Yoon Ara came every evening with a report, and every evening the numbers were worse. There wasn't enough meat, there weren't enough root vegetables, there was enough grain left for 2 weeks. She didn't panic. Foxes don't panic. Foxes calculate. And according to her calculations, famine would begin in 3 weeks. Yoon thought. At night, he sat by the fire and thought. Hunting yielded little. The steppe was depleted. Large game had gone north. Only small rodents and birds remained. Not enough. He needed another source of food, and he found it on the bank of a stream. Fish. The stream flowed into a lake 3 kilometers to the east. The lake was small, but there were fish in it. So Rin knew about the lake, but the she-wolves didn't catch fish. They didn't know how. They didn't think it was necessary. Fish isn't meat. Fish is what bears eat. Wolves eat deer. Doyoon listened to this. Then he went to the lake. He cut some willow twigs. He sat on the shore and wove his first fish trap, a cone-shaped one. The fish swim inside. They can't swim out. He set the trap in the stream where it flowed into the lake. In the morning, there were 3 fish in it. Small ones, but 3. He brought them back to camp, gutted them, roasted them on the stone slab of the oven. The smell wafted through the camp. By lunchtime, there was a line at the oven. Nambi tasted the fish. She looked at Doyoon. She said, "The meat is strange, but edible." That was the highest praise from Nambi. Doyoon wove 20 traps. He taught the foxes how to weave. Their nimble fingers did it better than he did. Yoon Ara wove faster than anyone else and still managed to comment on the other's work. Not bad. Fun. She came alive when she worked with her hands. A week later, 20 traps stood in the stream and by the lake. A catch every morning. 5 fish. 10. 15. By then, Yoon had built a smokehouse, a small shed with wicker grates. They salted and smoked the fish. Salt was a problem. There wasn't enough of it. The caravan sold them a handful for 2 pelts, a rip-off, but there was no choice. The smoked fish kept for a week. That was enough. Hunger receded. It didn't go away, it receded. Yoon Ara counted their supplies and said that at the current rate, they would last until the harvest, if nothing happened. Nothing happened. Instead, something else happened. In the 3rd month, 2 young she-wolves came to Doyoon, together. They stood before him and were silent. They fidgeted. They looked at each other. Then one of them spoke. She said they wanted to live together, in the same house, as a couple. Doyoon didn't understand right away. Then he understood. 2 female wolves. They had chosen each other. Not by the chief's order, not by the tribe's law, on their own. He looked at them. Young. One gray, the other with a white spot on her ear. They stood side by side, shoulder to shoulder, and waited. Both were nervous. The gray one, afraid the chief would forbid it. The other, afraid that if they are refused, she will lose the only thing she has. Doyoon smiled. He said, "What kind of home do you want?" The gray she-wolf blinked, then looked at her friend, then at Doyoon. She repeated, "What kind of home?" Doyoon nodded. "Yours. Choose where to build. I'll draw it." The 2 she-wolves stood before him, and he saw something happening that he could not describe in any language. Their faces were changing, not their expressions, their faces, as if something inside them had straightened out, like crumpled fabric that had finally been smoothed out. They nodded, both of them, at the same time, and left, holding hands. The tribe's glory surged, stronger than ever. 91. 8 points. For the 2 she-wolves who chose each other, for freedom, for love. Doyoon stood there and felt the system humming inside him, not in his head, in his chest. That is what feeds glory. Not walls and not food. Choice. The free choice of a free being. When someone can say, "I want," for the first time and not be afraid. He built them a house in 3 days, small, cozy, with 2 little windows, with a low threshold, with a stove. When they went inside, he stood outside and listened to the silence, then laughter, quiet, young, then silence again. So Rin stood beside him. She was looking at the house, then at Doyoon. Her face was strange, soft. He had never seen her face look soft. She said, "We didn't have that, never." Doyoon replied, "Now we do." So Ren was silent for a moment. Then she said quietly, "You're changing the world." Doyoon shook his head. "No, I'm giving the world space to change on its own." So Rin looked at him for a long time. Then she left, but her step was different, lighter, slightly lighter than usual. A week later, something happened that he could not have foreseen. The old shaman Ulma came to him at night. She stood at his threshold and waited, small, hunchbacked, long gray hair ears drooping along her cheeks, eyes white, almost blind. But she could see, not with her eyes, she saw differently. She said she had to speak with him, alone. Doyoon went out. They sat by the fire. Ulma was silent for a long time. Then she began. She spoke in wolf, slowly, with an ancient accent. She said she knew who he was, not a Korean, not a stranger, not a man from the sky. He is the repeater. That is what they called him in the old songs, the one who comes again. Doyoon froze. Ulma continued. The songs say that long, long ago, the first one came, a man from another world. He brought fire that does not burn. He built cities. He taught. The beast people loved him.
They called him father. He called them children, and that was his mistake, because children grow up, and he didn't want them to grow up. Doyoon listened, and something inside him grew cold. Ulma said he banned the old songs, said they were foolish, banned the moon festivals, said they were a waste of time, banned the clan names, said everyone must be one people, without wolves and foxes and tigers and hares, one people, his people. And 200 years later, his people forgot who they were, forgot their songs, their names, their horns and tails and fangs. They became shadows, and when the shadows rebelled, they burned his city and him along with it. Silence. The fire crackled. Doyoon sat, holding his breath. Ulma raised her blind eyes to him. "You're just the same." Doyoon swallowed. "I'm not like that." Ulma shook her head. "The song says he said the same thing." Doyoon was silent. What could he say? That he was different, that he was better, that he wouldn't repeat it. Those would have been words, and words to a shaman were smoke. He asked, "What must I do for you to believe me?" Ulma was silent. The first barley harvest was gathered at the end of the 3rd month. The ears of grain stood golden and heavy. Doyoon walked through the field and touched them with his hands. Every ear, full, ripe. The earth had accepted it. The 2 suns provided enough light. The rain came when needed. He stood in the middle of the field and couldn't believe it had worked out. 3 plots, 20 kilograms of grain for sowing, 60 kilograms in the end, a 3-fold increase. Not a record, but enough. 60 kilograms of barley, 20 of those for the next planting, 40 for food, 40 kilograms of grain for 110 mouths. It's not much, but it's a start. He divided the grain, 20 kilograms into a sack for sowing. Yoon Ara hung her key on the sack and said that if anyone touched the seed grain, she'd have to bite that someone's tail off. She wasn't joking. Or maybe she was. You can never be sure with foxes. Doyoon carried the remaining 40 kilograms to the new large mill. He was making flour. A stone grain grinder. 2 flat stones, one on top of the other, the grain between them. You turn the top stone. The grain is ground into flour. He showed the foxes. Yoon Ara tried it. Then she said it was the worst activity of her life, including fleeing a burning village. But she ground. The flour turned out coarse, with bits of husk, with tiny pebbles that had to be picked out, but it was flour. Yoon kneaded the dough. Flour,
water, a pinch of salt from their precious supply, and yeast. He had found wild yeast 3 weeks ago. He left a bowl of flour and water in a warm place. 2 days later, it had fermented. Bubbles, a sour smell, sourdough starter. He had kept it like a treasure. He fed it flour every day, and now it was ready. He added the sourdough starter to the dough, kneaded it, covered it with a cloth, set it by the stove in the warmth, and waited. 3 hours later, the dough had risen, doubled in size, fluffy, soft, alive. Doyoon divided it into 4 parts. He shaped the loaves. He placed them in the oven on a hot stone. He closed the damper. The entire camp stood by the oven, all 110 souls, in silence. They didn't know what he was doing. They only saw that he had been kneading some, and now that mass was in the oven. The smell appeared 20 minutes later. It came from the chimney, warm, thick, sweetish. There had never been a smell like this here before. The children lifted their noses toward the sky. The she-wolves flared their nostrils. The vixens froze. The little goats came down from the platforms. Even Nam-bi came out of the forge and stood there wiping her hands on her apron. 40 minutes later, Doyoon opened the damper. He took out the loaves, 4 of them. Hot, with a golden crust, steam rose upward. He placed them on the long table, the first table in the camp that he had knocked together 2 months ago. Everyone stood around it, silently. He picked up the first loaf, broke it in half. Steam shot up toward the ceiling. Soft white crumb inside, hot, fragrant, real bread. Nam-bi let out a sound. Doyoon turned toward her. The tigress stood, 2 meters tall, huge, strong, and tears were streaming down her cheeks, silently. She didn't move, didn't wipe them away, just stood there and cried. The last time she'd eaten bread was when she was 6, in the burned-down clan. Doyoon silently broke off the largest piece, walked over to her, held it out. She took it, with both hands, with her left hand, too, the injured one. She didn't flinch in pain. She brought it to her face, inhaled, and took a bite. She closed her eyes, chewed slowly, so slowly as if she wanted this moment to last forever. So Rin stood nearby, staring at the table, holding her breath. Doyoon saw her hands on her knees, fingers clenched, knuckles white. She wasn't crying. She-wolves don't cry, but she wasn't breathing. Yoon-ara stood by the wall. For the first time, she was silent. No jokes, no comments, no fox-like smile. She just stood there and looked at the bread. Tali sat on the floor by the door, ears lowered, hands on her knees, her lips trembled. Han Sol stood behind the adults, a little white goat among giants. She lifted her face to Doyoon and whispered a question. "Will there be some tomorrow, too?" Doyoon looked at her, at everyone, at the table with the bread, at Nam-bi, who was crying, at So-rin, who wasn't breathing, at Yoon-ah, who was silent, at Toli, who was trembling, at the 110 faces around them. He said, "Tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, and as long as I live." Han Sol nodded, a small, serious nod. Then she held out her hand. He gave her a piece of bread. She took a bite, chewed. Her eyes went wide. She had never eaten bread, not once in her life. She didn't know such a thing existed. Glory to play. 112. 21 points. For the bread, for the table, for the tigress's tears, for the fox's silence, for the little goat's whisper, for the fact that 110 creatures, for the first time in their lives or in many years, sat down together and ate the same thing. Not because they were hungry, because they were together. By the time Doyoon had handed out all the bread, 4 loaves for 110 mouths, everyone got a small piece. Some ate right away, some sniffed it for a long time, some hid a piece in their pocket. The children stuffed it into their mouths and asked for more. The old hare Ul-ma ate with her eyes closed and muttered something quietly, a prayer or a song. Doyoon didn't know, but it was important. He sat down against the wall, tired, his hands covered in flour, his face covered in sweat, his back ached. But inside, he felt warm, not from the stove. So Rin approached. She sat down beside him, silently,
for a long time. Then she spoke. "My dead, the 7 warriors I lost last winter, they have no names." Doyoon turned to her. "How can that be?" So Rin stared at the fire. "In the steppe, the dead are not named. The dead leave, their names leave with them. To speak a dead person's name is to keep them here, to prevent them from leaving." She paused. "But I remember every name, and it hurts me that they're gone and their names remain only within me." Do-young listened. Then he said, "What if the names remain not only within you?" So Rin looked at him. "How?" Do-yoon stood up. He went to the stream. He found 7 flat stones. He brought them back. He took the iron knife that Nambi had forged. He sat down and began to carve, letter by letter, name by name. So Rin sat beside him. She dictated, quietly, each name. 7 names, 7 stones. Do-yoon carved each letter deep and even, so the rain wouldn't wash it away, so the wind wouldn't wear it down. When he finished, it was dark. So Rin took the stones, all 7. She pressed them to her chest. Then she stood up. They walked out through the gate, to the hill behind the camp. So Rin dug 7 holes with her hands. Do-yoon wanted to help. She shook her head, by herself. She placed the stones, one by one, pressed them into the ground, leveled them, tamped them down. 7 stones on the hill, 7 names. The first memorial in the history of the steppe. The first time the dead were named aloud. So Rin stood before the stones, for a long time. Then she sank to her knees. She laid her hands on the ground. She pressed her forehead against the first stone. Do-yoon stood 3 paces behind her. Winter arrived in the 4th month, abruptly, without warning. It was cool in the evening. In the morning, there was snow, white and thick, up to the ankles. Do-yoon stepped out of the house and exhaled, steam from his mouth. Cold, really cold. He wasn't ready. No, he was ready, but not completely. 6 houses with stoves for 110 people, cramped, but everyone under one roof. Food supplies, smoked fish, dried meat, 40 kilograms of barley, root vegetables that the hares had taught the others to gather and store in the cellar. There were no potatoes here, but there were tubers similar to turnips, tough, fibrous, not tasty, but nutritious. The cellar was full. Yoon-ara counted the supplies and said that if they rationed, it would last 3 months. If they didn't conserve, they'd last 2. Do-yoon told her to conserve. Yoon-ara nodded. She was already conserving, from day 1. Foxes always conserve. But winter brought more than just cold. In the 2nd week of winter, tracks appeared on the southern trail. Horse tracks. Heavy, deep, many. So Rin found them at dawn. She ran back, eyes yellow, ears pinned back. She said one word. "They're coming." Do-yoon climbed up to the platform of the southern gate. He looked out onto the steppe. A white plain, snow, and a dark streak on the horizon, moving, slowly, but moving. He counted. 10 dots, 20, 30, 30 horsemen, on horses, in armor, a banner in front. He couldn't make out the coat of arms, too far away, but the banner was red and gold. Do-yoon went down. He gathered the council, quickly. Sorin, Nambi, Do-yoon, Evelyn. No, Evelyn wasn't there yet. Toli, Han-sol, he said. 30 horsemen from the south, on horseback, in armor. So Rin clenched her teeth. 30. That's twice as many as usual. Do-yoon nodded. They know about the slave traders. They know we're here. They know we're not running. Yoon-ara said, "How many warriors do we have?" So Rin replied, 18, armed, ready. Yoon-ara said, 18 against 30 in armor. We'll lose. Do-yoon shook his head. In an open field, yes, we'll lose, but we're not in an open field. He sketched it out. A palisade, a gate, platforms for archers, log barriers in front of the wall. A moat. A moat. He'd forgotten about the moat. A cold sweat broke out on Doyoon's forehead. A moat. He should have dug a moat around the palisade. How could he have forgotten? He stood up, looked at the wall, at the ground in front of it. Frozen. Hard. Digging in winter. A nightmare. But it had to be done. He turned to So-rin. A moat. We need a moat, by tomorrow. So-rin looked at him, then at the ground. Then she nodded. She didn't ask how. She whistled. A minute later, 30 women stood before her. She-wolves, foxes, hares, even little goats, with shovels and hoes. Nam-bi brought pickaxes, 3 iron pickaxes she had forged for the mine. Now they were being used for the ditch. They dug all night, by the light of the campfires. Doyoon dug along with everyone else. His hands were bleeding. The frozen ground yielded with difficulty. Every blow of the pickaxe reverberated through his shoulders. But they dug. The ditch turned out shallow, knee-deep, 1.5 meters wide, all the way around the palisade. Not a ditch, but a trench. But a horse wouldn't be able to jump over it on the run. They would have to stop. And a rider who stops is a target. By morning, the trench was ready. Doyoon stood on the gate platform and watched. The dark streak was closer. An hour, maybe 2. He came down, stood before the warriors. 18 pairs of eyes, wolf-like, fox-like, tiger-like, goat-like, hare-like, all armed. Spears with iron tips, bows, slings. So-rin stood in front, Nam-bi beside her. Her left arm was unsleeved. She had pulled her arm out of the sleeve, the injured one, the useless one, and she held a heavy hammer in it. Doyoon looked at her. Nam-bi caught his gaze. Both hands today. Doyoon wanted to object. He didn't. This wasn't his battle. It was their battle. He could give them walls, weapons, a plan, but they would have to fight on their own. He stepped onto the platform. Yoon-ara and Han-sol stood with him. Yoon-ara as a translator, Han-sol as an observer. The little goat had the best eyesight of them all. She could see an eagle from 5 kilometers away. Now she was watching the approaching horsemen and describing them. 32 horsemen. At the front, one in black armor, with a red cloak. Behind him, a standard bearer, the coat of arms, a horned stag on a golden field. Yoon-ara turned pale. Waldheim. Doyoon looked at her. Yoon-ara said quietly, "It's the Baron of Waldheim, the one who burned the steppe, the one who burned my village." Her voice was steady, her hands weren't. Her hands were trembling. Doyoon placed his hand on hers. She froze. She looked at him. Then she exhaled. Her hands stopped trembling. The horsemen rode up to the moat. They stopped. Doyoon saw their faces, surprised. They had expected to see huts and naked savages with bone clubs. They saw a palisade, a moat, a gate, platforms with archers, and silence. Dead silence. 110 souls behind the wall and not a sound. The Baron rode forward, a large man in black armor, his face hidden by a helmet. He raised the visor. A red face, a thick mustache, small eyes. He looked at the palisade and shouted, in a human language, which Doyoon did not yet understand, but Yoon-ara translated instantly. The Baron said that this land belonged to Waldheim, that the savages must come out from behind the walls, lay down their weapons, and submit. Otherwise, he would burn everything to the ground. Doyoon looked down at So-rin. She was standing behind the gate, a spear in her hand. She was waiting. He turned to Yoon-ara. "Translate. The Baron. We will not come out. This land is ours. If you wish to enter, come, but you won't leave." Yoon-ara translated, loudly, in the human language, clearly and without an accent. Doyoon didn't know she spoke the human language. She hadn't mentioned it. He'd ask later. The Baron listened, his face flushed red. He turned to his men. He shouted an order. 20 horsemen dismounted. They drew their shields. They formed a line. 12 remained on horseback. They advanced toward the wall, the foot soldiers in front, the horsemen behind, shields raised, swords at the ready. Doyoon stood still. He waited for the moat. The foot soldiers reached the moat. They stopped. They jumped over it, one by one, breaking formation. Doyoon raised his hand. He lowered it. 12 arrows struck the column of foot soldiers, compound bows, horn, wood, string, which he and So-rin had spent 3 weeks making from the horn brought by the goats. They hit 100 meters away, iron arrowheads that Nam-bi had forged at night. They pierce the skin. They don't pierce the armor. But the armor isn't everywhere. The neck, arms, legs. The first volley took down 4. The second, 3 more. The foot soldiers faltered. They had been trained to march in formation under arrows, but the formation broke at the moat, and the arrows weren't where they expected them, not from the front, from the walls, from 3 sides. Doyoon had positioned archers around the entire perimeter. They didn't just shoot at the face, they shot at the back, at the side. The cavalry charged forward. The horses didn't clear the moat. 1 fell. The second got back up. A third carried its rider back. Doyoon watched this from the platform, coldly, precisely, as if looking at a task, not at people. Later, he would think about it later. The Baron was screaming. His men were retreating, not running, retreating, professionally, shields to the rear, carrying away the wounded. They were good soldiers, but good soldiers aren't prepared for savages firing iron arrows from behind walls on 3 sides at once. 20 minutes later, it was over. 14 wounded on the Baron's side, 3 dead, not a single casualty at the camp, because they were shooting from behind the wall, and the Baron was shooting at the wall. The Baron stopped 100 meters away. He sat on his horse. He looked at the palisade. Doyoon could see his face. There was no anger there. There was incomprehension. This wasn't supposed to happen. Savages don't build walls. Savages don't shoot like that. Savages don't count flanks. The Baron took off his helmet. He placed it on the saddle bow. He stood there. Then he turned his horse and rode away, south, with the remnants of his 32, 18 in all. The camp was silent. Everyone stood on the walls and watched as the dark line disappeared over the horizon. Then So-rin raised her spear and howled. A long, drawn-out howl, a wolf's, victorious, ancient. The other she-wolves joined in. The vixens screamed. The does whistled. The hares beat drums made of stretched hides. Nam-bi stood in silence, a hammer in her hands, both hands. Her left hand trembled with pain, but she held it. She looked south and said nothing. She wasn't celebrating. She was remembering her clan. Winter weighed heavily. The snow lay knee-deep and wouldn't melt. The north wind cut her face like a knife. But the camp was alive. The stoves burned around the clock. Smoke rose from the chimneys in white columns. The children slept in the warmth. They baked bread every 3rd day. Yoon-ara distributed the portions with precision down to the last crumb, and woe to anyone who tried to take more than their share. She once caught a young hiding a piece of bread in her bosom. She didn't punish her. She sat her down beside her and quietly explained that if one hides food, another goes hungry. The girl didn't hide anything anymore. Yoon-ara didn't tell Doyoon. He found out from So-rin, who had seen everything and told him everything. Doyoon began building the stone walls on the 3rd day after the battle. He took the stone from the hill to the east, the very same hill where Nam-bi had shown him the ore vein. Boulders lay on the slope, smooth-edged, heavy, good for masonry, but hauling them in winter was torture. He drew a sketch of a sled, a simple one. 2 logs, crossbars, ropes. The she-wolves pulled the sled with stones through the snow like draft dogs and were offended by the comparison until the very moment they saw that in a single trip they were bringing back as many stones as they used to carry in 10 trips. After that, they competed to see who could haul more. So-rin won every time. She was faster than anyone and fiercer than anyone when it came to winning at anything. He laid the wall with lime mortar. There was no limestone, but there was ash. Lots of ash. The furnaces burned around the clock, and there was so much ash they didn't know what to do with it. Until Yoon knew. Ash plus clay plus water. Not lime mortar, but close. It holds the stone. It sets more slowly in the cold, but it sets. He built the wall from the inside of the palisade, a double wall. Wood on the outside, Stone on the inside, clay in between. 3 layers. An arrow won't pierce it. A sword won't cut through it. A battering ram will slow down. Everyone worked. In shifts. Yoon made the schedule. Yoon Ara wrote it down. 4 6-hour shifts. 25 people per shift. The rest rested, prepared food, and looked after the children. No one worked more than 6 hours. He remembered the system's limitations. Glory does not grow through coercion. If someone collapses from exhaustion, that is not construction. That is slavery. That's why 6 hours. That's why a hot meal for every shift. That's why the bathhouse runs nonstop. In the 3rd week of construction, Han Sol came to him. She wasn't building the wall. She was a messenger. From day 1. Yoon had been sending her to distant tribes. She would leave alone, a little white goat with a flute, barefoot through the snow, and she would return with news. Today she returned with news. In the west there is a tribe of lynxes, 40 female warriors. They heard about the battle with the Baron. They want to come. But they have a condition. They want to see the chieftain. Doyoon looked at Han Sol. She stood before him, her black horns glistening with melting snow. Above her, a line. Proud that they listened to her. Afraid that one day they will stop. He said, "You'll tell them the chieftain is busy, that he's building a wall, and that if they want to live behind this wall, they can come and help build it." Han Sol blinked. What if they get offended? Doyoon smiled. Then tell them the chief sent his best messenger, and that her word is as good as his. Han Sol froze. Then she straightened up, completely, on her tiptoes, horns up, chin up, small and radiant. She nodded and left, back into the snow, back into the steppe. So Rin stood nearby and watched her go. She's small. Doyoon nodded. Small. So Rin was silent. When I was small, no one sent me anywhere. They don't send the small ones. They hide the small ones. Doyoon turned to her. They don't hide the small ones. They teach the small ones to fly. So Rin looked at him for a long time. Then she snorted. Goats don't fly. Doyoon pointed at Han Sol's receding figure. She flies. So Rin looked. Han Sol was walking through the snow, quickly, easily. Her bare feet didn't sink in, as if on stone. So Rin didn't answer, but her ear twitched. That one, the torn one. It was her equivalent of a smile. By the 5th week of winter, a third of the stone wall was complete. The south side, the most vulnerable. 2 rows of stone, 1.5 meters high inside the palisade, invisible from the outside. The enemy would see the wooden palisade and attack it, break through, and run into the stone. A surprise. Doyoon stood and looked at the wall. Then he turned to Nambi. She stood beside him, silent, as always. Her left arm hurt more after the fight. She was using it with great effort. Every blow of the hammer sent a pain through her that she didn't show, but that he could see. In her eyes, in the way she froze for half a second after every swing. He said, "Give me your hand." Nambi looked at him. Her left hand. She held it out. He took it, gently. He felt her shoulder, her forearm, her wrist. She didn't flinch. She stood there looking down at him, 2 meters tall. He came up to her chin. He found it. The muscle under her shoulder blade. Spasmed, hard as a rock. An old injury, not a fracture. A torn muscle. Healed improperly. It was pinching a nerve. That's where the pain came from. That's where the weakness came from. He knew what to do. Not perfect, but better than nothing. A hot compress, every day, and exercises, stretching, slow, careful. He showed her. Raise your arm here, now slowly back. It hurts. Don't stop. Slower. That's it. Nambi did it. Silently, gritting her teeth, every morning. He applied the compress. She did the exercises. A week later, she raised her left arm to shoulder level. For the first time in 5 years. She stood with her arm raised and looked at it, as if it were someone else's, as if it were a gift she hadn't expected. Doyoon stood nearby and watched as the line above her updated. The arm is alive. It wants to forge with both. Glory to the tribe. 162. 13 points for the wall. For Han Sol. for Nambi's arm. Doyoon counted and realized the system was accelerating. The greater the glory, the more noticeable the effect. The children got sick less often. Wounds healed faster. The she-wolves ran farther without tiring. The she-foxes calculated faster. The she-goats saw farther. The hares heard more distinctly. Every point strengthened everyone, not through magic, through health, through satiety, through peace. When you eat 3 times a day and sleep in warmth and know that you won't be sold or beaten, your body works the way it was always meant to work. Spring arrived with mud and fear. The snow was melting. The drainage ditches were choked with water. Doyoon spent 3 days digging new channels, knee-deep in icy slush. So Rin dug beside him, silently. She didn't complain. She didn't ask why. She just dug. By the end of the 3rd day, the water had drained where it needed to. The houses remained dry. But Doyoon knew that spring brought more than just mud. The Baron would return, with a large force. Yoon Ara confirmed it. She had sent 2 foxes south on a reconnaissance mission. They returned a week later. The news was bad. The Baron hadn't brought knights. The Baron had brought the Order of the Pure Dawn, holy warriors, the kingdom's finest fighters, and Grand Master Goslin Wenzel himself was with them. Yoon Ara spoke calmly, but she was clutching the key around her neck so tightly her fingers had turned white. The order, 200 knights, infantry, a supply train, siege ladders. They would be here in 3 weeks. Doyoon listened and counted. 200 knights against 36 female warriors. Even with a stone wall, even with bows, even with a moat. The math didn't add up. 200 isn't 32. 200 is an army. He called a council, a full one, all the leaders. So Rin, Yoon Ara, Nambi, Tali, Han Sol, Kim Na, the leader of the lynxes, the old shaman Ul Ma, 7 women at the table, and him. He told the truth, unvarnished. 200 nights, 3 weeks. We won't withstand the assault. Silence. So Rin clenched her jaw. Nambi clenched her fists. Yoon Ara was counting something on the birch bark. Tali lowered her ears. Han Sol sat motionless. Kim Na, the lynx, was silent. Ulma shook her head. Doyoon continued. We won't withstand the assault. But we don't need to withstand it. We need to make sure there is no assault. Yoon Ara looked up from the birch bark. How? Doyoon drew a map, a large one, covering the entire tabletop. Steppe, forests, hills, rivers, fordings, roads. He drew for 3 hours, and the sketch, covered in dust, worked its magic on everyone who looked at it. They saw the terrain as if they were flying over it. He pointed it out. The order is coming from the south. The only road for the supply train passes through the 3 fords, a wide river, 3 places where it can be crossed. Without the fords, the supply train won't get through. Without the supply train, there's no food for 200 nights. Without food, the army fights for 3 days. Then it leaves. So Rin understood first. The fords. Doyoon nodded. We're not defending the fortress. We're defending the fords. Yoon Ara was the second to understand. We're not fighting. We're hindering them. Doyoon nodded again. Nambi was the third to understand. She didn't say anything. She stood up from the table. She went to the smithy. An hour later, she returned with a drawing, her own. Iron spikes, 4 points. No matter how you throw them, 1 point always sticks up, for the bottom of the fords. A horse will step on them and won't go any further. Doyoon looked at the drawing, then at Nambi, then back again. Caltrops. He knew that word, from history books, an ancient weapon. He hadn't thought of it. She had. Nambi, blacksmith, warrior, master. She didn't just forge what he drew. She thought for herself, and her thoughts were as sharp as her iron. 3 weeks. Nambi forged day and night with both hands. Her left hand worked, not perfectly, but it worked. Compresses helped, exercises helped. Anger helped the most. She forged caltrops, hundreds of them, small, four-pronged, sharp. Each one fit in the palm of her hand. With Rin, she trained the female warriors, not for combat, for ambushes, for running, for communication. She divided the 36 fighters into 6 squads of 6. Each squad knew its position at the fords. Each knew where to run if their position fell. Each knew where the nearest cache of food and water was. Doyoon set up a communication system, signal fires, 3 points between the fortress and the fords. 2 little goats manned each point. They could see farther than anyone and ran across the rocks faster than anyone. Spotted smoke, lit their own. The next point lit theirs. 10 minutes later, the fortress knew what was happening at the fords. Khan Sol commanded the little goat messengers. She didn't fight. She ran. Between the squads. With the Cossacks. With water. With bandages. A little white goat with a flute on her belt. Toli was preparing the infirmary. A supply of bandages. Boiled water in clay jugs. Herbs. Ointments. Needles for stitching wounds. She trained 4 assistants. Hares. Quiet and nimble. With gentle hands and strong nerves. Yoon Ara did what she did best. She calculated. She planned. She schemed. She sent the foxes to the trade caravans. Not to buy. To sell information. For silver. The order is marching across the steppe. The caravan routes are blocked. It's unprofitable for the merchants. The merchants began to bypass the area, and at the same time, they spread the word in the cities that something unusual was happening on the steppe. Beastmen are building fortresses. Beastmen are defeating the barons. Rumors spread south faster than the army. It was a weapon. Not arrows or swords. Information. Yoon Ara understood this better than anyone in the tribe, including Doyoon. She was a fox. Information was her element. The order appeared on the horizon exactly 3 weeks later, just as Yoon Ara had predicted. Signal fires were lit. Smoke, smoke, smoke. 3 columns of white smoke from the fords to the fortress. Doyoon stood on the tower of the southern wall, the new one, the stone one, 3 meters high, with a platform for archers and a canopy to shield them from arrows. He looked through a spyglass, made of mountain crystal and polished bone. The lenses were cloudy, but he could see. A column, long, cavalry in front, infantry in the middle, supply train in the rear. Banners, white with a golden sun, the order of the pure dawn. And at the very front, a single rider, in white armor, on a white horse. Grandmaster Goslin Wenzel. Doyoon lowered his horn. He turned to Yoon Ara. She stood nearby, pale, composed, a key around her neck. Birch bark and a stone for writing in her hands. He said, "Let's begin." Yoon Ara nodded and whistled, softly, piercingly, a fox's whistle. It was heard at the first signal post. The goat lit the smoke. Green. That meant to begin. They waited at 3 Forks. In the night before dawn, 6 detachments left the fortress, quietly, in the darkness. So Rin led them herself, caltrops in sacks, arrows in quivers, knowledge of the terrain in their heads. They scattered the caltrops across all 3 fords, on the bottom, under water, invisible. Then they took up positions, on the banks, behind rocks, in the thickets. They waited. The order approached the fords at noon. The vanguard dismounted. The first rider rode into the water. The horse took 3 steps, a 4th. A neigh, wild. The horse reared up, a caltrop in its hoof. The rider flew into the water. The second rider stopped. The third. Shouts, orders, chaos. They didn't understand what was happening. So Rin waited, until Yoon told her, "Don't shoot first. Wait. Let them get confused. Let them lose their formation. Let them get angry. Angry people make mistakes. The order tried the second ford, caltrops. The third, caltrops. Wenzel sent the infantry to feel out the bottom. The infantrymen walked through the water cautiously. They probed the bottom with sticks. They found the caltrop. They removed it, slowly, very slowly. And while they stood waist deep in the water, unarmed with sticks in their hands, 12 arrows struck from the shore, not at the knights, at the supply wagons, burning arrows. Yoon Ara had come up with the idea. Wrap the arrowhead in birch bark soaked in fat, set it alight, shoot. 3 wagons caught fire, food, fodder, tents. The order rushed to put out the fire. The female warriors retreated, disappeared into the steppe, like smoke. Wenceslas halted the army. The order approached the fortress on the 7th day. Doyoon stood on the tower and watched. 200 knights, infantry, a supply train, banners, white with a golden sun, beautiful, frightening. They set up camp 500 meters away, tents, campfires, sentries, professional, neat. Wenzel knew his business. At dawn the next day, a lone horseman rode up to the gates, a white horse, a white flag, a messenger. He shouted in the human language. Yoon Ara translated. Grandmaster Goslin Wenzel requests an audience with the leader of this settlement. Doyoon looked at So-rin. She was standing at the gates, spear in hand, face like stone. She shook her head. Don't go out. Doyoon looked at Yoon Ara. She shook her head too. A trap. Doyoon looked at Nambi. She shrugged, with both shoulders. Her left one hurt but still worked. She said, "If you go out, I'll go with you." Doyoon nodded. He went downstairs. He walked out through the gate. Nambi followed behind him. So-rin growled but didn't stop him. She stood on the wall, with a bow, an arrow nocked, aimed at the envoy. Doyoon walked toward the white horseman. His legs didn't tremble. He was surprised by this himself. 3 months ago, he had trembled at the sight of a spear at his throat. Now he was walking toward the army and wasn't trembling. Not because he had become brave, because behind him were 136 men who depended on his decisions. Fear for others had supplanted fear for himself. The messenger led him to Wenzel's tent, a white tent, a large one, with a golden sun on the canopy. It was warm inside, a brazier, a carpet, a table with maps, and a man. Goslin Wenzel, 58 years old, lean, tall, the face of an ascetic, sunken cheeks, gray eyes, no malice, no contempt, something else, interest. He sat at the table and looked at Doyoon for a long time. Then he spoke. Yoon Ara wasn't there. Nambi stood behind him, but she didn't understand human. Doyoon understood. Poorly, in fragments. The language resonance worked slowly with human language because he had hardly ever worked side by side with humans. But Yoon Ara had been teaching him for 3 months, 10 words every evening. He understood enough. Wenzel said he was surprised, that he'd expected to see savages with sticks, but he saw a fortress with stone walls and iron arrows and a system of signal fires. He said it was impossible, that beastmen weren't capable of such things, that someone was leading them, and that someone was a human. Doyoon remained silent. Wenzel continued. He said that if Doyoon was a human, then he should understand. Beastmen cannot live on their own. They need leadership, civilization, faith, order. Without these, they are doomed to savagery and extinction. He said this without hatred, with conviction, with pain even. He believed in what he was saying, every word. Doyoon listened and saw. He saw a man who had devoted his entire life to an idea. The idea was simple. We are better. We must lead. They are weaker. They must follow. A beautiful idea, logical, and dead like a stone. Doyoon spoke, in broken human language, slowly, choosing his words. He said he had seen children who stopped coughing when he built them a stove, that he had seen a tigress who cried when she ate bread for the first time in 20 years, that he had seen a female hare working at a table for the first time in her life, that he had seen 2 female wolves who had chosen each other and were not afraid. He said they were not wild, they were hungry. There is a difference. Wenzel listened. His face did not change. Then he said, "You teach them to build. That is good. But you do not teach them the true faith. You're not leading them to the light. You're leaving them in the darkness of their animal superstitions. That is cruelty, not mercy." Doyoon looked at him, and in that moment he saw, not a line, not a need, something else. He saw a reflection. 1,000 years ago, in Shengula, a man just like this sat, with the same confidence, with the same pain, and with the same blindness. That first man also believed he knew better. He also wanted to save them. He too considered their songs barbaric, and he burned everything he loved, because love without respect is a cage. Doyoon stood up. He said, "I will not fight you, but I will not give them a single child, not a single woman, not a single home. If you want to enter, you will enter over the dead, and over the dead you will leave." Wenzel looked at him, gray eyes, unmoving. Then he said, "Then tomorrow." Doyoon nodded. "Tomorrow." He stepped out of the tent. Nambi followed him. Halfway to the fortress, she said, "You're trembling." Doyoon looked at his hands. They were shaking. He said, "I know." Nambi paused. Then she said, "It's normal. The brave tremble too." Just later, Doyoon looked at her. She was walking beside him, 6 feet tall, orange stripes, both hands free. His left hand ached but worked. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking ahead, at the fortress, at the walls, at the smoke, and she walked. The next morning, the order was in formation. 200 knights, infantry with ladders, cavalry on the flanks, banners unfurled, Wenceslas in front on a white horse. They marched, silently, without battle cries, professionally. Doyoon stood on the tower, with a map, with a spyglass, with 3 messenger goats. He didn't command them forward. He commanded differently. Right flank, archers to the eastern wall. Left, lynxes past the gate into the ambush. Toli, the wounded one from the 3rd position. Water for the 2nd squad. Khan Sol, run to Sorin, tell her to change position. Caltrop traps in front of the south wall. A little goat ran, along the wall, over the stones, barefoot, as if on a flat floor, faster than any courier. So Rin received the order. A minute later, her squad changed position. The order struck the southern wall. Ladders were set up. The knights climbed. Arrows struck from above, iron tips, compound bows, close range, point blank. Armor cracked. Knights fell. They climbed again, tenacious, brave, trained. 3 hours, 3 assaults, 3 retreats. The southern wall held, stone behind wood, double protection. Arrows, stones, boiling water from clay cauldrons. Toli, with her hairs, carried the wounded right out from under the arrows. Quiet, quick. Her hands didn't tremble, bandages red with blood, but her hands didn't tremble. Nambi stood at the gate, with a hammer, in both hands. She didn't come out. She waited. If the gate collapsed, she would be the first, and the last. The 4th assault. The order threw everything at the western wall. Weaker, lower. They noticed. The ladders were set up. The knights broke through onto the wall. 3 of them, swords drawn. And then Kim Na rose from behind the wall. A lynx, silver, with a scar. Behind her, 12 lynxes, silent, swift, with short blades that Nambi had forged for them specifically. A lynx in close combat is not a she-wolf. A lynx is a shadow with a knife. 3 knights fell from the wall before they could even swing their weapons. The order retreated. The 5th assault, the 6th, 7th. The day was ending. The sun was setting. The order lost 42 men, 14 killed, 28 wounded. The fortress lost 9 wounded, not a single one killed. Because Tali was faster than death, and because So Rin knew every corner of every wall, every stone one could slip on. Wenzel retreated. At the end of the day, he led his army back 500 meters, set up camp. Doyoon watched his camp from the tower. He saw Wenzel sitting by the fire, alone, without a helmet, gray hair, the face of an old man who, for the first time in his life, didn't know what to do. The next morning, Wenzel sent a messenger again. Negotiations. Doyoon agreed. They met on neutral ground, between the fortress and the camp, an empty field. Wenzel came alone. Doyoon came alone. Yoon Ara stood on the wall with a spyglass. So Rin stood on the wall with a bow. Nam Bi stood by the gate. Wenzel looked older than yesterday, 10 years older. He said, "You are not human." Doyoon shook his head. "Human." Wenzel said, "People don't do what you do. People don't build fortresses for beasts. They don't teach them to shoot. They don't place stones on their graves." Doyoon replied, "Maybe people should." Wenzel was silent. Then he said, "I fought for 30 years, for faith, for light, for civilization, and yesterday I was stopped by 20 fishing spears and a handful of homemade caltrops. After the order left, peace did not come. Work came, harder than war. Spring brought warmth, and with the warmth came people, tribes, from all over the steppe. They had heard that the fortress had held out, that the order had left, that the beast people had defeated the men in iron, not by force, by wits, and they came. 5 at a time, 10 at a time, 20, in families, in clans, in the remnants of tribes, with children in their arms and the elderly on their backs. Within 3 months after the battle, the population had grown to 800. Yoon didn't sleep. He built. The palisade expanded. Then it became too small and was torn down. In its place, a wall went up, a stone wall, around the entire perimeter, a new one, 4 times larger than the old one. The village became a settlement. The settlement became a small town. Houses stood in rows. The streets were straight. The drainage system worked. Wells provided clean water. 4 bathhouses, 2 smithies, 3 bakeries. Tali's infirmary grew into a hospital, with 4 rooms, 8 assistants, shelves of herbs from floor to ceiling, and a maternity ward. Doyoon built it at the beginning of summer. Tali stood in the doorway of the new maternity ward and couldn't bring herself to go in. She stood there and looked. Clean walls, scraped clean floors, boiled water in clay jugs, clean linens, windows letting in light, beds on wooden frames with clean animal skins. She stood in the doorway and her ears trembled. Doyoon stood beside her, silent. Tali whispered, "My mother died in childbirth. There was no one there, just me. I was 9. Doyoon didn't answer. He couldn't. Tali said, "No one here will die alone." Then she went inside. In the first month at the maternity home, 3 babies were born. All survived. The mothers survived. Doyoon wasn't there. This was Tali's place, her home, her work. He had only built the walls. But when Tali came out after the 3rd birth and looked at him, for the first time raising her eyes and not looking away, he realized that these walls were worth more than the entire stone wall surrounding the city. Glory to the tribe, 342. And it kept growing, every day, with every new home, with every child born alive, with every child who went to school. Ulma opened the school, an old blind shamaness, a hare. She taught the children to count on sticks and to sing old songs, the very ones she had sung to Doyoon that night by the fire, songs that reminded them who they were. Doyoon came to listen every evening. He didn't understand the words, but he learned the melodies. He hummed to himself under his breath while building, off-key, out of tune. So Rin once told him that his singing sounded like a sick goat. Han Sol took offense on behalf of the goats. 6 months after the battle, a letter arrived. A real one, on paper, with a seal. A scout fox brought it from the southern road. The letter was from Wenceslas. Yoon Ara translated it. The Grand Master wrote that he had spoken with the king, that he had reported on the fortress, on the walls, about the arrows, about tactics, about logistics, that the king had listened, and that the king agreed to negotiations. Not a treaty, negotiations. A difference, but a start. Yoon Ara said that Wenceslas had added a note at the bottom, without a seal, in small handwriting. He wrote, "I don't understand you, but I'm no longer sure I have to." Doyoon read it, reread it. Then he folded the letter and put it away. Yoon Ara asked, "What shall we reply?" Doyoon said, "We'll invite him. Let him come, alone, without an army. He'll see for himself." Yoon Ara opened her mouth, closed it, then said, "You're crazy." Then she nodded. I'll write it." She wrote it in 4 languages: human, wolf, fox, and Elvish. In case the letter was intercepted, let everyone read it. Let everyone know. The beast folk invite the Grand Master of the Order to peace talks, as equals. The letter went south with a fox courier, and Doyoon went up the hill, that very hill with the burial mound where the 7 stones of So-Rin stood. Now there was another one standing next to the stones, nameless. Doyoon had placed it a month ago, when he read the last tablet. They found it while building the new foundation, in the ground, under the stones, deep down, a stone slab with text carved into it, old, ancient. Ulma deciphered it. The tablet was from that first one, the last words of the man who stood on this very hill 1,000 years ago. He wrote that he had made a mistake, that he wanted to save them but instead killed them, that he took away their songs and names and horns and tails and everything that made them who they were, that he turned a living people into the shadow of his dream.
And that in the end, when the shadows rose up and burned his city, he did not resist. He stood on the wall and watched the fire and knew he deserved it. The last line was a prayer. Let another come. Let him make amends. Let him not repeat my mistakes. Doyoon read it and didn't sleep for 3 nights. He sat on the hill. He looked at the city below, at the lights, at the smoke, at the walls he had built, and he thought, how am I different? He built houses. I build houses. He taught. I teach. He led. I lead. Where's the line? When leading turns into dragging, when teaching turns into imposing, when love turns into a cage. On the 3rd night, So-Rin came to him, silently. She sat down beside him. She didn't ask. She waited. He told her everything. About the plaque, about the first one, about the prayer, about how he's afraid of becoming the same. So-Rin listened for a long time. Then she said, that first one, he listened to our songs. Doyoon shook his head. He banned them. So-Rin nodded. And you? Doyoon was silent. Then he said, I come every evening to listen. So-Rin said, there, just calmly. One word, there. That's the difference. The 2nd year, late autumn. The leaves had fallen. The steppe stood brown and bare. The wind carried the scent of frozen earth and smoke. Everyone had gathered on the hill above the city. 800 souls, 12 tribes, wolves, foxes, tigresses, hares, goats, lynxes, and 6 more tribes that had arrived over the summer. Lizards from the southern swamps, roe deer from the eastern plains, owls from the night hills, badgers from underground burrows, otters from the lakeshore, and 1 human woman, Evelyn Ashford. She arrived a month ago, alone, in leather armor, with a scar across her eyebrow, a former knight of the Order of the Pure Dawn. Her squad had received orders to burn down the village of hares in the west. She refused. She deserted. She walked north for 3 weeks. She came to the gates. So-Rin wanted to kill her on the spot. Nam-Bi wanted to interrogate her. Yun-Ara wanted to use her. Doyoon went out to meet her. He looked. Evelyn stood before the gates, dirty, hungry. With a sword she held blade down, not ready for battle, ready to surrender. Above her, a line. She served the light. The light turned out to be fire. Nowhere to go. Doyoon opened the gate, let her in, didn't ask a single question. A month later, he laid a blueprint for a new school before her. He said, you will teach the children military training. Don't teach them to kill anyone. Evelyn looked at the blueprint, then at him. Her face was inscrutable, but her hands were trembling. She nodded. That same night, she took off her order's medallion and buried it under the school's threshold. So-Rin saw. She said nothing, but she stopped sharpening her knife when Evelyn walked by. For So-Rin, it was almost a sign of friendship. Now Evelyn stood in the crowd, the only human woman among 800 beast girls, and no one looked at her as an outsider, because she taught their children, and whoever teaches your children becomes one of your own. 12 banners stood in a semicircle at the top of the hill. Every tribe, every clan,
every color: wolf gray, fox red, tiger orange, hare beige, goat white, lynx silver. 12. In the center of the semicircle lay a large, flat stone. Doyoon had carved it himself. 2 weeks of work. Every evening after construction, he would come to the hill and carve. A smooth surface, smooth edges. There was nothing on the stone. No coat of arms, no name. An empty stone. Waiting.
Doyoon climbed onto the stone. He was small, next to Nambi, next to So-rin, next to the lynxes and tigers and wolves. 5 feet 7 inches, skinny, with scraped hands, with calluses from the axe and hammer. In a torn jacket he'd worn since day one because Yoon Ara had sewn him a new one, and he couldn't bring himself to throw the old one away. An ordinary man. On a rock in the middle of an army that loved him. He spoke, quietly. Yoon Ara stood beside him, translating, into 4 dialects at once. Tales moved. 6 tales, 6 languages. She translated, and her voice did not tremble, not once. Then Yoon said, "I am not a king, not a god, not a savior. I am a builder. I came here by chance, or perhaps not by chance. 1,000 years ago, another like me stood on this hill. He built, he taught, he loved you, and he was wrong. He decided he knew better, that your songs were unnecessary, that your names could be replaced, that your horns and tails and fangs were things to be gotten rid of. He turned a living people into his dream, and the dream burned down, because the dream was his, not yours." Silence. 800 pairs of eyes. The wind stirred the banners. Ulma stood in the front row, blind eyes raised to the sky. She listened. Doyoon continued. "The city we are laying the foundation for today is not mine. It is yours. I built the walls. Nambi forged the iron. So-rin held the defenses. Yoon Ara counted every grain. Toli bore your children. Han Sol ran across the steppe with my word, which became your word. Evelyn teaches your daughters to stand tall. Ulma sings songs older than all of us. This is not my city. This is your labor, your pain, your bread." He paused. Then he said, "If in 100 years you decide to forget me, forget me. If in 1,000 years you decide to burn it yourselves. Don't let strangers do it. But as long as I live, there will be bread every day for everyone." Silence. Then a soft sound. So-rin. She stood in the front row, gray-white, upright, with a spear she hadn't let go of since that first day when that spear was aimed at his chest. She took a step forward. Doyoon dropped to his knees. He took out a key, iron, simple, heavy. Nambi had forged it a week ago. The key to the gate. A gate that didn't exist yet. The gate to a city that didn't exist yet. The gate to the future. He held out the key. Not to So-rin, not to Nambi, not to Yoon Ara. He held it out downward, toward the front row, where the children stood. A little girl, 5 years old, a bunny, gray-beige, with long, soft ears. Toli's daughter, born in a maternity ward. The first child born not on the ground, but on clean sheets in a house with a window. The girl looked at the key, then at Doyoon. Then she held out her hands, small, with soft fingers. She took the key, clenched it in her fist, tightly. Doyoon smiled. Toli stood behind her daughter. She didn't move. Her ears were up completely for the first time, high, straight. Her eyes were wet, but she was smiling, widely, openly, without stuttering, without fear. So-rin took another step. She stood next to Doyoon. She placed her palm on his shoulder, quietly, just like back then on the hill. A warm, rough palm, calluses from the spear, scars from the ropes. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Nambi stood on the other side, both hands free. Her britch was working. Not perfectly, but she was working. She looked at the city below, at the walls, at the forges, at the smoke, at the iron she had forged, at the world she had helped build. One corner of her mouth was smiling, just one, but So-rin saw it. Yoon Ara stood next to the stone. the key to the treasury around her neck, a birch bark scroll in her hand, 6 tails behind her back. She had translated his speech into 4 dialects without a single mistake, and when he finished, she allowed herself one thing, one moment. She looked at him, and her eyes flashed, quickly. Then she turned away and began writing down who had eaten how much at the ceremony. A fox to the end. Han Sol sat on the edge of the stone, her legs dangled, a flute in her hands. She wasn't playing. She was listening to the silence that had fallen after his words. A silence in which 800 beings simultaneously realized that they were no longer savages, not slaves, not prey. They were a people. In the little pouch on her belt lay pebbles, many. The pouch wouldn't close. One for every time he had stroked her head. She would add another one today. Evelyn stood in the back rows, upright, hands behind her back, as if at attention, but her eyes were wet. She had run away from people who believed they were bringing the light. She had come to the beasts who were creating the light themselves. And for the first time in 23 years, she felt she was standing where she was meant to stand. Ulma could see nothing, but she heard everything. The silence, breathing, the wind, hearts. 800 hearts beating in unison. She smiled. An old, blind hare who had kept the songs for 1,000 years. She smiled because the songs had finally found someone who wanted to listen to them, and not to rewrite them. The first snow was falling over the hill, light, white, silent. Snowflakes settled on the banners, on the stone, on shoulders, on horns and ears and tails. On So Rin's hand, which rested on Do-yoon's shoulder, on Nam Bi's hammer, on the key in the little hare's fist. Do-yoon knelt on a rock in the midst of his people. No, not his, theirs. He stood in the midst of their people, and for the first time in 2 years in this world, he wasn't calculating, he wasn't planning, he wasn't drawing a blueprint in his head. He just stood there and watched. At the walls, at the smoke, at the fields beyond the walls, at the houses, at the people, at the children, at everything they had built together, from clay and sticks and iron and stubbornness and pain and bread and tears and music and songs older than all the cities in the world. Glory to the tribe. 500. Exactly, a round number, like a keystone, like a closed door. Like a period at the end of a sentence. The wind blew from the north, the snow grew heavier. So Rin squeezed his shoulder slightly. He covered her hand with his. Below, a little hare raised a key above her head, high, with both hands, like a banner, and she smiled. And behind her, on the southern road, a column of dust rose. A rider, alone, in white clothes, unarmed, without a banner. Gosselin Wenzel was riding to the negotiations, alone, as he had been asked, until Yoon saw the rider. He looked at Yoon Ara. She saw him too. She nodded. He looked at So Rin. She took her hand off his shoulder. She picked up a spear, not for battle, out of habit. He looked at Nam Bi. She nodded, both hands, ready. He looked at Tali. She was hugging her daughter, a key in her little fist. Clean sheets in the maternity ward, 3 children alive. I looked at Han Sol, a flute in her hands, a small bag of pebbles, bare feet on the cold stone. I looked at Evelyn, back straight, teary eyes, school behind her. He looked at Ulma, blind eyes, old songs, 1,000 years of waiting. He rose from his knees, brushed the dirt off himself, looked at the city, at the hill, at the nameless stone next to So Rin's burial mound. A stone for that first one, the one he never knew, but to whom he owed everything. He spoke softly, addressing the stone, the empty grave, the man who, 1,000 years ago, stood on this very hill and lost everything. You're one of us too, you just lost your way. Sleep. The wind carried his words away. Snow settled on the stone, white, pure. Do-yoon turned toward the city, toward his people, to the horsemen on the horizon, to the future that needed to be built. Every day, one house at a time, one loaf of bread at a time, one name on a stone at a time. He walked down the hill. He went to open the gate.